Welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 118, being recorded on June 27, 2024. And what we're going to do in this stream today is we're going to talk about COVID, which we've talked a lot about COVID since 2020 on this channel, more than on most channels. Channel has been recognized, even among non-communists, as a place that you can hear about COVID, because we've gotten way into the science on COVID, talking about, all the particulars of how it causes inflammation in the body and everything else, and the need to continue masking. I know it feels like utterly futile even talking about that at this point, but I still mask. I don't even really think about it anymore. It's just something I do now because I got COVID back in December of 2020, I believe, for the first time. And it completely knocked me out. I had the fatigue, severe brain fog, couldn't think straight. It also messed up my immune system for 3 years. I haven't noticed anything super recently regarding my immune system, but I've had things on and off I've never had before. And it seemed to signal clear immune dysfunction. Actually, I take that back. I did have something just a few months ago that seemed to signal continuing impaired immune function. So, COVID, it's important. We've talked about it a lot. I haven't talked about it as much because, well, for a number of reasons. Partly, I've been trying to, just for my own mental health, the pandemic has taken a huge toll on me personally, between having the long COVID and trying to do plans and having them get interrupted by the pandemic in all spheres of life, whether it was housing or school or work, like all kinds of things I wanted to do. It was kind of like a window of opportunity in my life. I was real tied up with a bunch of stuff during a lot of the 2010s, and then I was getting out of some of my obligations, and it was like, let's, mix things up and go on to the next stage of what I was trying to do, and then bang, the pandemic hits. And I thought, okay, well, this will go on for like a year or two, they'll figure it out, and we'll kind of move on. And here we are in 2024, where there's still mutations and just global unchecked spread. There's not as much death as there used to be, in part because most of the people who are most vulnerable are already dead. So that's not a victory. And people are still getting disabled and impaired and all kinds of stuff by it. And like I said, we've talked about that a lot. So we're going to talk about COVID both in terms of the science and the politics, and then even within the politics and the sort of social ramifications and the social fallout. We're going to look at that from more of a general perspective and then more of a communist-specific perspective. Some of you may be familiar. There's a group called SCORE, which does COVID organizing specifically from like a socialist lens. And they wrote an open letter to the Communist Party of the USA recently, and they got a reply, and then they replied to the reply. So we're going to cover that. And so, yeah, we'll get back into this topic. I found an article for kind of some of the general coverage that really gets into many of the different angles that we've been talking about COVID from over the years. I think that that's a good one. We're also going to talk a little bit about the bird flu, the H5N1, and which hasn't made the leap to spreading between humans at this point, but it is spreading among animals, and it's spreading from animals to humans. Where you really have to worry is when it can spread from human to human, and it doesn't seem to have mutated to do that yet, but it will be really bad if and when it does, if it keeps mutating and figures out a way to do that. Eventually it's going to crack the code and be able to jump from human to human. Anyway, yeah, so we'll talk about a bunch of that and then just also do some chat, because in the last stream we were talking about, I kind of went on a rant. I'm kind of obsessed with the whole housing crisis that is going on right now and the accompanying melt up of the stock market and the economy generally, all the inflation and everything, which I think is going to end with a bang sometime in the next 12 months, probably in the shorter end of that. But it would be, let me say, unprecedented if, given the current set of conditions, there wasn't a bang in the next 6 or even like 3 months. But we will see, because, every time the business cycle comes around, it's a little bit different. There are a lot of variables, and they never quite line up exactly the same way twice. But given a lot of the indicators, people running out of money and everything else, the inverted bond yield curve that has been going on for a very long record amount of time, at this point, up there in the top three. There are a million signs of a recession, yet things keep melting up, and then eventually it's going to pop. So was ranting about that a lot in the last live stream, which again should be posted Saturday. Didn't have as much time for chat. So anyway, we are there. All right, so let's, I guess, pick up with why do we care about COVID? Well, first of all, it's killed over 1 million people in the United States alone, and it has disabled many more. But here's another reason. So this is from Fortune Well. The headline is, COVID can cause new health problems to appear years after infection, according to a study of more than 130,000 patients. So this is from last month, and it basically references another study. So it says, even as national institutions struggle to coordinate meaningful trials for possible long COVID treatments, and I'll add something that has really gone completely by the wayside. There have been all these sort of institutes for studying long COVID set up, and none of them have really amounted to much at this point. It's just not really a priority. But researchers continue to tally the damage. New findings suggest that the disease's reach isn't merely long, it's still growing. Yeah, so it's a novel virus that can significantly impair immune function. Of course, it is going to have far-reaching consequences. We already knew that in the first year or two. And when you mess with your immune system like that, as well as basically globally most major systems in the body, the SARS coronavirus 2 virus itself can infect basically any tissue type that has ACE2 receptors in the cells. And so that's your brain. It can infect the brain stem, which is like the control box for your autonomic functions like breathing and keeping your heart beating. That automatic stuff you don't have to think about. So you can get dysautonomia, or like irregular heartbeat and other things because your brainstem is messed up from a COVID infection. Your heart, your liver, your pancreas, your gut, kidneys, male reproductive organs, all kinds of tissue types. So really significant organ damage. And then also it can infect T cells, which are a major component of your immune system. So, having depleted T cells is not a good thing. It leaves you more prone both to getting other infections and to things like cancer. So not good at all. It's novel. We don't understand what its long-term effects are yet, but we know that it can cause global infection more or less in the body, causing, there's like 100 different symptoms of long COVID. And that's not because it's psychosomatic or people are just imagining the stuff. It's because it can cause all this damage in the body that then manifests differently in different people, because everybody, has the same basic organs, but people's constitution, for lack of a better word, people's exact state of health is going to be different from person to person. And so it just shows up, it presents differently in different people, causes more damage to some organs in some people, and more damage to other organs in other people. So anyway, so 3 years after their initial bouts with COVID-19, patients who'd once been hospitalized with the virus remained at, quote, significantly elevated risk of death or worsening health from long COVID complications, according to a paper published May 30 in Nature Medicine. So let's take a quick look at that paper. We're just going to read the abstract. So this is from Nature Medicine. The title is 3-Year Outcomes of Post-Acute Sequelae of COVID-19. Sequelae, it's like the word sequel. It's something that comes after. So it means consequences. When in the health context, the sequelae of a disease are the consequences of a disease. So you get COVID-19, what happens? And when they say post-acute sequelae, in other words, you get the infection and then for like 3 weeks, you get the acute phase. That's when you get the fever, the coughing, like all that kind of stuff up front. But then there's the post-acute phase after those 3 weeks. In the following months and years, you can have consequences, sequelae. So that's what this is about. And specifically, they're talking about 3 years out, what's going on as a consequence of this infection. So the abstract, severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, or SARS coronavirus 2, infection causes post-acute sequelae of coronavirus disease 2019, also known as COVID-19, or PASC, as we were just saying, in many organ systems. Risks of these sequelae have been characterized up to 2 years after infection, but longer-term follow-up is limited. Here, we built a cohort, that's just like a data set, of 135,161 people with SARS coronavirus 2 infection and 5,200,000 controls from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs who were followed for 3 years in order to estimate the risks of death and long COVID. Among the non-hospitalized individuals, because if you're hospitalized during the acute phase, you have much higher odds of getting long COVID. You actually have majority greater than 50% odds of getting long COVID. If you're not hospitalized during the acute phase, meaning that your infection is not bad enough as to require hospitalization, hospital care, then you're less likely to get COVID, although the odds are still substantial of getting some long COVID symptoms. But anyway, among non-hospitalized individuals, the increased risk of death was no longer present after the first year of infection. Okay, so if you make it that first year, you're kind of good, and apparently it wears off, generally speaking. And risk of incident PASC declined over the 3 years, but still contributed 9.6 disability-adjusted life years per 1,000 persons in the third year. Among hospitalized individuals, risk of death declined, but remained significantly elevated in the third year after infection. Wow. So if you're hospitalized with COVID, you have an elevated risk of death in the following 3 years, which will decline from year to year, but it stays elevated over baseline. The risk of incident PASC declined over the 3 years, but subsequent residual risk remained in the third year, leading to 90 disability-adjusted life years per 1,000 persons. Altogether, our findings show reduction of risks over time, but the burden of mortality and health loss remains in the third year among hospitalized individuals. So if you're not hospitalized, there are risks in that first year. Things are likely to, at least as far as your risk of death, wear off after that first year. But if you're hospitalized, and the older you are, or if you have other, lung conditions and things, the more likely you are to be hospitalized, well, then you're at risk of death, elevated risk of death, for 3 years after that point. And the way that this whole thing is working with just letting it rip and letting the virus just reinfect people over and over and over again, well, people, you could be hospitalized multiple times. So people have got to stop catching this thing. You just have to. We're going to actually talk about how to do that by wearing masks in just a minute. There was a study on the efficacy of masks. And guess what? N95s work. And surprisingly, KN95s were pretty ineffective. Those are the ones with the ear loops. Personally, I think always said that N95s are the best. That's what I wear. KN95s are at least something, but according to this, they weren't much better than cloth masks. Anyway, we'll get to that in a second. First, though, let's look at a study out of CIDRAP at the University of Minnesota. I think that's the Center for Infectious Disease Reporting and Policy, I think. Anyway, so this is from May 29, and it says, though severe COVID-19 infections in children are uncommon, children and young adults with comorbidities, that is, other illnesses, are at increased risk for critical illness during COVID-19 infections, according to a new study in the Journal of the Pediatric Infectious Diseases Society. Quote, we selected studies that included patients aged 21 years or fewer with confirmed COVID-19 and provided enough data to estimate the odds ratio, or OR, of critical disease for a given risk factor, the authors said. So the odds ratio is basically just, do you have elevated risk or reduced risk compared to the baseline? The studies collectively examined 172,165 children, adolescents, and young adults with COVID-19 in 45 countries. So we're talking about people up to the age of 21. So this isn't just young children. Heart disease adds to the risk. In healthy children with no comorbidities, like no known other diseases, the absolute risk of critical disease from COVID-19 was 4%, so 1 in 25. Compared with no comorbidities, the pooled odds ratio for critical disease was 3.95 for the presence of one comorbidity and 9.51 for two or more comorbidities. The highest critical risk factor was age under 1 month. So, youngest newborns are the most at risk, with 7 studies on about 1,300 infants aged under 1 month, showing that 20% had critical illness. But the authors warned that that number includes premature infants, and it may or may not be widely representative of the true risk to full-term babies. Okay, that's still significant. 51 studies assessed the risk of cardiac and pulmonary, that is, heart and lung comorbidities, including congenital heart disease, high blood pressure, heart failure, cardiomyopathies, valvular disease, septal defects, arrhythmias, and pulmonary hypertension. So a variety of the more common heart and lung issues. The rate of critical disease among 2,372 children with cardiovascular disease in these studies was 30%, and the pooled odds ratio was 3.6, the authors said. Previous pulmonary conditions, so like you don't have it now, but you had it in the past, were a risk factor for severity, with a pooled critical disease rate of 24% and an odds ratio of 2.15, or double. Seizure disorders pose a substantial risk. Quote, few studies examined the extent to which poorly controlled asthma modifies the severity of COVID-19 in children, the author said. Children with controlled asthma showed no significant risk for severe disease, but uncontrolled asthma, so people who are not getting proper medical care, or you can't afford, or aren't taking the inhaler for some reason, or whatever other medication, that more than doubled the risk of developing severe COVID-19. So the adjusted risk ratio was 2.24. One study found that children, however, who were hospitalized for asthma within 12 months of the study were at increased risk for acute COVID-19 severity. So that's almost triple. Children with seizure disorders and other neurologic complications, because remember, there's a lot of brain and nervous system oriented problems that happen with the long COVID. So that is significant. So children with seizure disorders and other neurological complications had more than triple the odds of critical illness compared to the general pediatric population. Odds ratio 3.40. So almost 3.5 times as much. In addition, obesity, diabetes, and compromised immune systems were also tied to statistically significant odds ratios greater than 2 or more than double. Quote, the current management of COVID-19 in the pediatric population is multifaceted, requiring a balanced assessment of the potential risks and benefits of various therapeutic agents, as well as a comprehensive evaluation of the myriad underlying risk factors that may predispose children to more severe disease, the authors concluded. Although our study is subject to certain limitations, it contributes evidence on several risk factors that are clearly associated with a more severe disease trajectory. So, it's bad for kids. We already know from previous studies that getting a COVID infection increases kids' risk of getting both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So, I mean, those have totally different etiologies, and that's not good because it does attack the pancreas and damage the pancreas. And so there's enough type 2 diabetes in particular from, dietary and lifestyle issues. But then to be upping your odds because of viral infection is just really the last thing that anybody needs at this point. But let's talk about avoiding COVID. So let's go over to the N95 mask study. And I found this interesting. So this is out of the University of Maryland. N95 masks block almost all airborne COVID-19. Well, that's not surprising because that's, pretty much what they're made for. I mean, not COVID specifically, but exactly this kind of thing. Unlike a surgical mask, which are really not meant for aerosol particles, but more for droplets. And remember that COVID-19, or SARS coronavirus 2, the virus that causes COVID-19, is transmitted in an aerosol fashion. In other words, it hangs in the air like smoke, or like, use an aerosol air freshener, and it hangs in the air, and you can smell it for hours after. Yeah, it's because it's very tiny particles that are light enough to hang in the air, more or less. And so the virus acts the same way. And the more that people are singing or shouting or just breathing forcefully, whatever, expelling air forcefully, the more it's going to be hanging in the air. But anyway, In a head-to-head comparison of masks worn by people with active COVID-19, the inexpensive duckbill N95 came out on top, stopping 98% of COVID-19 particles in the breath of infected people from escaping into the air. So that's on the outgoing side. In other words, if you have COVID, wearing the mask will stop it from going into the air, or it will stop 98% of it from getting into the air. Now, it's true that just one viral particle can be enough to cause infection, but the less you're putting into the air, the lower the odds that, it's going to end up in somebody else's respiratory tract. So anyway, led by researchers from the University of Maryland School of Public Health, results showed other masks also performed well, blocking at least 70% of viral particles from escaping from the source, an infected person's exhaled breath. The study, which is titled Relative Efficacy of Masks and Respirators as Source Control for Viral Aerosol Shedding. So source control means it's controlling it at the source, an infected person's mouth and nose, for viral aerosol shedding from people infected with SARS coronavirus 2, published May 29 in eBiomedicine, a Lancet journal. Quote, the research shows that any mask is much better than no mask, and an N95 is significantly better than the other options. That's the number one message, says the study's senior author, Dr. Donald Milton. Milton is a UMD School of Public Health professor of environmental health and a global expert on how viruses spread through the air. Quote, because COVID-19 is airborne, we focused on the extent to which wearing a mask reduces contamination of the air around you, Milton says. This latest study is a continuation of investigations by UMD's Public Health Aerobiology Lab into how contagious respiratory viruses such as influenza contaminate the air. How do they do it? Researchers asked volunteers with COVID-19 to breathe into a unique contraption known as the Gesundheit 2 machine. Funny. Developed by Milton and colleagues to measure viruses in exhaled breath. Participants who breathed into the machine for 30 minutes at a time were asked to do a variety of vocalizations. For example, repeating the alphabet, singing happy birthday, and even honoring UMD's mascot by repeatedly shouting, "Go Terps." In each instance, researchers measured the amount of viral particles in the exhaled breath of volunteers, pairing each 30-minute session of breathing with a mask on with another 30-minute session with no mask. Quote, data from our study suggests that a mildly symptomatic person with COVID-19 who is not wearing a mask exhales a little over 2 infectious doses per hour, says first author Dr. Jianyu Lai, a postdoctoral researcher at the PHAB lab. But when wearing an N95 mask, the risk goes down exponentially. The duckbill N95 blocked 99% of large particles and 98% of small particles from escaping out of a person's mask. Milton says that the design's tight seal, a powerful filter in the mask, and large airspace for breath to move around all contribute to the duckbill's success. So that's really interesting to me because for a while I was using duckbills, not because I read that they were the most effective, but because they were the cheapest. And actually they look kind of weird, but I found that there was this one particular brand, which is not made anymore, which is the only reason I stopped using them, that it was super cheap for a box of 50. It was like $20 for a box of 50. And I just got a really nice fit from this particular model. And I switched to Auras, which I think also make a nice seal, and they're comfortable. But what they're saying about having a large airspace for breath to move around, that means inside the mask, between your face and the mask, there is a large airspace. I think it's bigger in the duckbill than it is in the Auras, the 3M Auras. So anyway, good to know. I actually still have a box of duckbills, so I might use those in more critical situations, like maybe in the winter. Surprisingly, KN95 masks, the disposable masks used widely, were no more effective than cloth or surgical masks. So I've always shied away from the KN95s, and I've mentioned this because the ear loops, rather than the head straps, which the N95s have, they just don't make a good seal at all. I would sometimes use them more in like outdoor conditions where, and not outdoors in a crowd, but like outdoors where there's not a lot of people around, But I didn't really rely on the KN95s too much, like indoors or anything like that. And it was really for this reason. I didn't do a full study, but they confirmed what I suspected. The study found that a common brand of KN95 masks leak more air than duckbills or other studied masks because they don't conform to the face well. That flaw is compounded by a powerful filter with more flow resistance that pushes air out of the mask at the sides instead of through the filter, allowing more virus particles to escape into the surrounding air. So in other words, the N95s, it's less likely to push the mask out from your face. I would noticeably have that occurring with the KN95s, where I'd be wearing it. And if I had to, well, like I just did, like cough or clear my throat or something like that, I would notice the mask like puffing away from my face because the air wasn't able to get through the mask, and so it was pushing the mask away like a sail. And so, anyway, this pretty much confirms that. So I'll stay away from those from now on. Cloth masks also outperformed both KN95 and surgical masks. That's amazing. Cloth masks outperformed the KN95. Milton theorizes that cloth masks with greater coverage wrap around the face and give a better seal than either KN95 or surgical masks. With cloth mask filters, flow resistance is also lower, meaning it lets more air through, allowing breath to pass through the filter and not leak out the sides of the mask. So this is really just like stick with the N95s. Limiting the amount of viral, or P100s. So it didn't study P100s, it sounds like, but those are very secure on the face and they let a lot of air through. Limiting the amount of viral particles in the air is a key way, I would say the key way, to control highly contagious respiratory viruses in general, Milton said. This is even more the case with the COVID-19 virus, given that transmissibility has increased over time because the virus has mutated to be more transmissible, with Omicron in particular breaking through the immunity that people had developed from vaccinations or prior infections. Quote, our research shows definitively why it's so important to have non-pharmaceutical responses like wearing masks, and why we need studies like this to illuminate which masks are most effective, says Milton. Both Milton and Lai hope that their findings will inform health policies going forward, including when combating potential outbreaks like bird flu or even the common flu. So there's actually a little more. Let's just finish that. Duckbill N95 masks should be the standard of care in high-risk situations, such as nursing homes and healthcare settings, Lai says. Now, when the next outbreak of a severe respiratory virus occurs, we know exactly how to help control the spread with this simple and inexpensive solution. And then they go on with some more credits. But there you go. I'll get into the chat in a minute, but speaking of bird flu, let's talk about this for a minute. So this is an article in The Nation. There's a lot of different articles about this. I just want to use this as a jumping off point. I know some of you in the chat already know things about the bird flu, and so feel free to type those and we'll discuss them, but let's just give everybody a jumping off point. So the title is, We're Facing a Potential Bird Flu Catastrophe. H5N1 is spreading across the U.S., targeting some of our most vulnerable communities and exposing our tattered public health system. Yeah, it's not really tattered so much as even what is there, nobody has any political will to stand up for what's needed. That was like when Biden announced Vax and Relax in May 2021, when that made absolutely no sense and basically killed the collective pandemic response. Nobody stood up to it. I mean, really, like on an institutional, organizational, maybe even statewide level, nobody stood up to it. I mean, it was just kind of silence. There were a few holdouts that kept doing mask requirements for like another week or a month, but that was really it. So anyway, we need bold action and we need it now. We sure do. And it's not just here. It's with housing. It's with Medicare for all. It's with all kinds of, there's just an across the board cost of living crisis. Whether it was wealthy Londoners fleeing to the countryside to avoid the bubonic plague in the early 17th century, or Manhattanites heading for upstate and seaside retreats to do the same to avoid SARS coronavirus 2 in the early 21st, urban elites have rarely stuck around for pandemics. As Troy Tassier says in his new book, The Rich Flee and the Poor Take the Bus, quote, the most physical and financial harm from epidemics falls upon the people who are least privileged and most marginalized. while those with the most resources seek out the best security and safety money can buy. And let me tell you, only rich people need this explained to them. Yet the notion of rural communities as refuges from disease then and now doesn't match up with reality. Those rich Londoners brought the plague with them to the small villages and hamlets nearby, and far from there being a safe haven, the mortality rate from COVID-19 was 20% higher in rural America than in urban enclaves. This misconception is grounded in a refusal to recognize that rather than an unspoiled oasis, our rural counties are home to some of our most marginalized populations, from the meat and poultry workers that keep us fed to the upstate prisons where cities lock up those they would rather ignore and forget. The virus raced through those areas, amplifying the pandemic across the landscape with deadly consequences. Everything that made rural America uniquely vulnerable to COVID-19 still exists, and now a new threat from a well-known pathogen, influenza, is brewing in America's rural heartland. An outbreak of H5N1 started months ago and is spreading across dairy farms in the United States. This strain of bird flu looks like it is, quote, well entrenched and has been in cattle for a long time, and probably very, very, very widespread, as Stat News reported. While there are only 2 documented human cases thus far, given the poor surveillance effort to date, there are likely other people infected as well. And I saw something about, I wasn't able to grab it for the show here, but I saw something about wastewater surveillance in Texas at times being as high as the regular flu. I don't know if anybody knows anything about that. Let me know. I read that and couldn't believe it. But while this strain of H5N1 has not yet acquired the ability to spread through the air or person to person, the virus presents potentially serious health risks to those who work with cattle on dairy operations in rural areas. The vast majority of those working on the front lines are immigrants, many of them undocumented. Anthropologist Thurka Sangamurti has talked about the precarity of the lives of these workers, from not having, quote, rights within the workspace, not having access to good housing, or being really scared to speak up when they're being exploited or when they feel like they're being discriminated against. Agricultural workers also face an increasingly threadbare rural health system, which is ill-equipped to respond to their needs. Over the past 30 years, rural America has lost hospitals, primary care providers, and public health infrastructure. Many farm workers lack insurance and have tenuous connections to healthcare and other services. Without robust health systems and formal safety nets, many farm workers and their families turn to Band-Aid care, as in putting Band-Aids on things that need stitches, rather than care that would help them over the long term, or in other words, appropriate levels of care. Now add a new pathogen into the mix. We know the U.S. public health system is weak, social protections are inadequate, and healthcare is tilted toward expensive, tertiary, specialized practices. Rural America is ground zero for this structural, human-made disaster, which makes rural farming communities desperately vulnerable to H5N1. For all the bluster of the current response to H5N1, with the CDC, the FDA, and the USDA all out with their plans to address the virus and its spread, no one is acknowledging that a crisis already existed in these places. Dealing with this new outbreak will undoubtedly expose the long-standing political failures to address the public health needs of these communities. Band-Aid care is no match for H5N1 if it acquires the mutations it needs to transmit efficiently among humans, and if the outbreak takes off in these settings, there is simply no firewall to stop it from making the trip from its rural origins into the rest of the country. The instinct of those in Atlanta, which is the CDC headquarters, or DC, is to deal with the current emergency and ignore the rest. Except that is not how the world works. We tried it with COVID in the US, and the fundamental weaknesses in American public health, welfare, and healthcare ensured that we did worse than our G7 peers in COVID deaths and excess deaths per capita, let alone, the non-imperialist countries. H5N1 is not yet a human epidemic, but the widespread nature of its grip on livestock in rural communities means it gets to bide its time. In other words, the virus is sitting there with the Rubik's Cube, and every additional hour or day that you give it to flip through that thing, it's you're rolling the dice. I mean, we talked about that a lot with COVID, but you're rolling the dice because every time that the thing replicates, there's a chance of mutation, and there's always a chance that the mutation is going to be more efficient than its previous form. It isn't always more efficient, but there's a chance that it will be. As with COVID-19, we are offering false assurances with the ubiquitous refrain of, we have the tools, suggesting that a technical fix, the mere existence of vaccines, tests, and treatments for influenza will be our salvation. Yet we know that this is a vastly insufficient response. We still have the time to address structural issues plaguing rural America, to give those living in rural agricultural counties and the rest of us a leg up on H5N1, though it's admittedly a race against the clock and would require a massive investment of resources and political will. There are signs that President Biden and Congress want to invest in rural America to lift up economic opportunity. I mean, as always with the Democrats, this is like tinkering around the edges, but if you say so. But investing in rural health is vital to these economic strategies. They must go hand in hand. Wait, you mean that people doing the work also need medical care to stay in good enough health to do the work? I don't get it. There are encouraging moves here as well. Are there? Like Joe Biden, who is, quote, for a public option. That was on his campaign website. Literally, it has never come up once since then. And actively opposes Medicare for all. Encouraging moves, really. But we need something akin to a Marshall Plan for rural America. I mean, yeah, except we're in neoliberalism, which is basically underpinned by profitability crises for late-stage capitalism. Ever since the 60s and 70s, they've been like, what are we going to do about this? The capitalist class collectively. They came up with neoliberalism, basically privatize, deregulate, and defund public programs. And that's what they're doubling down on all the time now. So, I mean, you know, they're not really interested in making those kinds of investments. And we're really reaching a point where the tiniest changes would more or less require a revolution. They just don't want to do anything. And there might be bipartisan support for such bold efforts, particularly in health. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, there's a link there to something, but, you know, bipartisan support. If so, I mean, it's token, you know, that's not widespread. Finally, the revival and survival of rural, I mean, at least among the politicians. Obviously, like, a lot of people want a better healthcare system. Only 8% of Democratic voters oppose Medicare for all. Only 8% oppose it. That's 1 in 12. Yet the party, the politicians, they don't do anything about it. Like, literally only Bernie Sanders, and, you know, and Bernie was a sheepdog, and Bernie was a fake, and he continues to be a fake. But he at least kept talking about Medicare for all, even when, you know, nobody was forcing him to. Literally no other politician in the Democratic Party was talking about that at all. So, no, I don't think that support is super deep, you know, within the 1% controlled Democratic Party, which is to say the whole party. You know, obviously you have people in the party who support it. Only 8% oppose it. But yet nothing happens. Why is that? Is it because the party doesn't actually represent most of the people who vote for them? Yes, that is why. Finally, the revival and survival of rural America depends on immigrants. Over 70% of farm workers are foreign-born, and so the economic and health initiatives we surely need will be for naught unless we safeguard the future of these workers and their families from xenophobic policies from county seats, state houses, and from DC. Wait, are you saying that particularly the ultra-reactionary, petty, you know, lower strata of capitalists in various localities can't think beyond extremely short-term profits? I mean, that's how the whole system works. But then you get the people who are particularly myopic and, you know, sort of like never traveled outside of their, you know, hometown kind of thing. But anyway, managed to get their hands on power. H5N1 reminds us that when it comes to infectious diseases, there is no place to hide, no refuge or safety, except what we build together, systems and infrastructures to protect all of us. Perhaps this time around, we'll do better and chalk up a victory against an old foe. They got to end with this, like, sort of false hope conclusion there. Why? I don't know. Because they don't want to, like, you know, bum people out, man. But, hey, the reality is not that great. Let's take a break for chat, and then we have a couple of long articles to get through on COVID. All right, so actually, for the people watching this on YouTube or SoundCloud, Patreon, Spotify, Substack, after the fact, We just had a technical issue. I recorded all of that stuff thinking that the chat was there in the background, but my internet connection got interrupted and I didn't get any notification of it. So we read all that and you just heard that, but the chat didn't. So I was planning on taking a break for the chat right there. Unfortunately, there is no chat. So we're going to go ahead into the next article and then we'll catch up with the chat after that. So the next thing that we were going to get into is sort of the general COVID social fallout analysis. And so this is by Julia Doubleday from May 7, published in the Gauntlet. And the title of this is a pretty long article, but I want to go through it because I think it's a really good recap of a lot of the topics that we've talked about over the last 4+ years here on the channel about COVID. So let's get into this, and then we'll get into some communist-specific stuff from SCORE. So this article is called, "Does the Public Understand That Variant Means Vaccine Resistant? Getting boosted is critical because the virus is changing. Other forms of mitigation are critical to slow the rate of change." So last week, and this was early May, the World Health Organization announced that it will recommend the creation of a new booster for the JN1 variant of COVID-19. Wow, and only 6 months too late. One little problem, JN1 was hyper-dominant all fall and winter, but it's quickly fading away. Now, its descendant, KP2, is positioned to take off in an early summer wave. By this winter, when we're able to get the brand new JN1 vaccine, it'll already be gone. The dominant variant will most likely be a descendant of KP2. Not even KP2 anymore, but it's going to be the grandchild of JN1 at that point. So the vaccines aren't keeping up remotely with the rate of mutation, almost like using the vaccines as your primary method of combating the pandemic is not a viable strategy for reasons that we're going to discuss in this article. Vaccines are a good backup, but as we say, in N95 we trust. You want to stop the virus from getting into your body in the first place. That is plan A. Avoid super spreader events. When you do have to do something, wear an N95, and that's the way it is. That's just the reality of living in the world these days. But yeah, I mean, stay updated on your vaccines. And there was a lot of people I know still COVIDing who do like twice a year. Some people even do like every 3 months when you could do that. Now you can really only get a booster for most people once a year. And that's just not enough because they wear off much faster than 12 months. And also, even when they reformulate them, there's several variants behind. So anyway, let's continue. If you, like me, got the most recent booster, you got a vaccine designed to help prevent and lessen symptoms of XBB 1.5, the variant most dominant in the winter of 2022 to 23. During that winter, the booster was designed to combat the Omicron BA variants, which were predominant a year prior in the winter of 21 to 22. Do you see the pattern? Often when the topic of COVID is broached, people who have paid little attention since early 2021 point out that, quote, now we have the vaccines. Okay, yes, we do. But are you aware of what has changed since 2021? Like specifically, the virus has changed. When Moderna and Pfizer announced their COVID-19 vaccines, the efficacy of the shots was thrilling. Early data showed a reduction in infection, not just severity, but in actual infections of 90+%. Here's a link to a Pfizer release which states, quote, data from over 43,000 participants, half of whom received BNT 162b2 and half of whom received placebo, showed that the vaccine candidate was well tolerated and demonstrated 95% efficacy in preventing COVID-19 in those without prior infection 7 days or more after the second dose. These pivotal data demonstrate that our COVID-19 vaccine candidate is highly effective in preventing COVID-19 disease and is generally well tolerated, unquote. In the vaccine world, this is a home run. No vaccines are 100% effective against infection, but if you can get enough 90+% effective shots into people's arms fast enough, you can achieve what is called herd immunity. Herd immunity is achieved when the disease gradually disappears from a population and may result in eradication or permanent reduction of infections to zero. In other words, the virus runs out of hosts and it dies out. It has nobody else that it can jump to and replicate itself. Because unlike bacteria, viruses can't reproduce outside of a host. They need host cells to copy them, basically. They can't copy themselves. So if they run out of hosts, they're dead. Unlike a bacterium or a fungus, which as long as it has food, it can usually reproduce on its own. Anyway, this was the explicit goal of the Biden administration, stating in early 2021 that we could be, quote, heading to herd immunity by summer. His exact words were, quote, I feel confident that by summer, we're going to be well on our way to heading toward herd immunity, unquote. This meant at the time getting to a place where the majority of the population has immunity to COVID, and therefore vulnerable people aren't exposed. It's critical that people understand that Biden's COVID response never achieved its own stated goals. Rather, the public was gaslit into accepting a new goal, forever reinfections. So, yeah, that didn't work, and the whole plan failed. We're living that now. They don't talk about it anymore. Biden, in fact, last year said the pandemic is over. Not exposing, he later qualified that, but that was clear that that's the sentiment that they want, people to have as their takeaway. Not exposing vulnerable people was a key goal of the lockdowns and other mitigation measures which we adopted in 2020. COVID was and is dangerous, but the vast majority of abled people under 65 who got COVID did not die even prior to the vaccines. It's odd to see young liberals pointing to their own mild infections as proof that vulnerable people don't need to, quote, live in fear, because it's very literally the same argument young MAGA people made in 2020. What MAGA attributed to their immune systems, liberals attribute to the vaccines. But the reality is, they were never the demographic most at risk. The goal of lockdown was to avoid the exposure of vulnerable groups that would lead to mass death and overwhelm healthcare systems and hospitals. The goal was to protect vulnerable groups until herd immunity could be achieved. And again, herd immunity we still don't have and are not likely to ever get now. As late as November 2021, amid the Delta wave, Fauci's projection for what back to normal would look like, the point at which we could give up masking and other mitigations, was no more than 10,000 cases a day nationally, ideally under 3,300 per day. But today, during the lowest lull we've had in a full year as of spring 2024, we're seeing 165,000 COVID cases daily. The winter wave broke 1.5 million cases per day. Since Fauci set the bar of under 10,000 cases per day as the marker for normal, we've never had a single day with fewer than 10,000 new cases. In fact, we've never had a single day with under 100,000, 10 times that, new infections. And we've had many with over 1 million each winter, which is 100 times Fauci's marker for normal. This is not herd immunity, and it's not what the government projected or prepared for. Perhaps this is why our government officials and media continue to try to redefine herd immunity and claim that we do have herd immunity to COVID, instead of explaining that the vaccine first, or rather, really vaccine only strategy was misguided and has failed. That is a fact. Governments keep moving the goalposts of success. They declare victory while urging us to get reinfected repeatedly. Reinfections, which, by the way, carry myriad long-term health risks, including cognitive damage, heart damage, and disability, among other things. We were talking about this before. It can age your brain the equivalent of 10 years and cause brain mass loss, brain shrinkage. It can cause immune dysfunction, as we were talking about earlier, and so on. Really serious things that get to the core of your health and the ability of your body to function. Herd immunity is what we have for measles, smallpox, diphtheria, mumps, and other vaccine-preventable diseases. Vulnerable people, even those who cannot be vaccinated because of medical conditions, are therefore protected from exposure to and infection with these diseases because of the immunity of the herd. How is a vulnerable person being protected by the herd if the plan is for them to get exposed over and over and over again? It's ludicrous. But now they just don't talk about it anymore, and that's been totally abandoned. The early high efficacy of the original shots is why their debut was met with such jubilation, and I was happy to see that too. I thought that by 2022 we would be getting back to our life, but that's not at all what happened. And unlike a lot of other people, I personally wasn't willing to just close my eyes and play pretend about that, because COVID had hit me so hard. I didn't ever want to catch that again. It really, really messed me up. So Walensky on Rachel Maddow stated the following, quote, "Today, the CDC reported new data showing that under real-world conditions, not only are the vaccines for those folks, thousands of them, keeping those people from getting sick from COVID themselves, the vaccines are also highly effective at preventing those people from getting infected, even with non-symptomatic infections. And if you're not infected, you can't give it to anybody else. What this means is that we can get there with vaccines. We can end this thing. Now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person." And again, that may have been true for a brief period of time, but is not true anymore. "A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus does not infect them." So like the virus couldn't get a foothold in their body, at least at first, but then the virus changed. The virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else. It cannot use a vaccinated person as a host to replicate itself and get more people. That means that the vaccines will get us to the end of this. So that was Walensky, head of the CDC for a while. To reiterate, that's the end of the quote, to reiterate, Walensky explicitly stated that because the COVID vaccines at that time were believed to prevent infection, then the shots could end the pandemic. This also implies that were the vaccines not able to prevent infection, then they would not be sufficient to end the pandemic. Our leaders, that phrase always creeps me out. They're not my leaders, but the people in power overestimated the ability of vaccines alone to mitigate COVID because of early data before the virus had had the opportunity to counterpunch us through mutation. By July 4th, the Biden administration declared victory over COVID. That following winter was the second deadliest wave of the COVID pandemic, and it was the deadliest wave for cancer patients. Winter 2021 to 22 was a wave of mass death of the exact kind we'd tried to avoid. We saw thousands of people dying per day, while the good folks at the New York Times continued to cover it as no big deal and even spin it as a positive. I guess, in amongst their various pitches for invasions of other countries and whatever. It was the point at which many vulnerable people, being reassured that with the vaccines and the, quote, mild strain circulating, Omicron, which was actually later shown to be no milder than the original Wuhan strain, were exposed to COVID for the first time. Some of them paid for the mistake of believing the government with their lives. We will never likely see a wave as acutely deadly again as that, because the hundreds of thousands of people who could not survive their first contact with COVID-19 are already dead. In other words, that damage is done. 40% of those who died during the Omicron wave 1 were vaccinated. Let's read that again. 40% of those who died during Omicron wave 1 were vaccinated. So that was not full protection, obviously, and they were really throwing us to the wolves at that point. I remember I was doing a school program and they decided to open up in-person classes, and I was like, there's 1 million cases a day being reported. Why are you opening up in-person classes? And crazy. But anyway, 60% of those dying by the following summer were vaccinated, and vaccinated people still make up the majority of deaths today. Yes, vaccinated people are overrepresented in the population, but as thousands continued to die each week this winter, like this past winter, it's a far cry from Biden's claims that COVID had become a, quote, pandemic of the unvaccinated. In early 2022, his administration blamed unvaccinated people for overwhelming hospitals, while tens of thousands of vaccinated people died in a matter of weeks. Here's what happened. Throughout the pandemic, the Biden and Trump administration and governments worldwide, and let me add, all of the state-level public health departments in the United States, because each state has its own public health department, have been prone to accepting the most optimistic science as the truth and promoting those optimistic predictions as solid facts. COVID isn't the only arena where this is true. We certainly see it with climate change. We saw it with our premature declaration that COVID wasn't airborne. It is. We saw it with our claims that people would only get COVID once. We saw it with the claims that COVID would probably just randomly get milder. That one still just blows my mind that anyone, particularly with any knowledge of biology, repeated that. But anyway, and in the case of the vaccines, we saw it with the idea that herd immunity to COVID would be possible, that the virus wouldn't just quickly mutate around the vaccine protection. Unfortunately, the virus mutated very, very quickly. Has this been well communicated to the public? Or does most of the public believe that we are as well protected as we were in the spring of 2021? And boy, I remember that brief period of sort of mental peace that I had, getting the vaccines. I got them in like either April and May or May and June. I can't remember. But I remember that fall starting to do stuff again. I went out, like I went to a restaurant, I was kind of doing stuff for a while, and I was getting a little bit comfortable again. I was like, oh, they're figuring this out, 2 years, whatever. And then Omicron hit like a few months later that winter, and it was like, oh boy, this is not at all okay. Yet they started opening everything like schools back up again. And wow. Think of it this way. The mRNA vaccines contain a little blueprint for the COVID spike protein. Once your body receives the blueprint, it follows the instructions and builds a replica of the COVID spike protein. In the case of our first round series of shots, it is specifically, genetically, the spike protein of the ancestral strain. Then your immune system learns how to get rid of the spike protein. It's like a training program for your body. When it encounters the real spike protein, your body reacts quickly because it has seen this protein before. One common analogy used to explain viruses, vaccines, immune systems, and mutations is the mugshot. When your immune system encounters a pathogen, it creates a bunch of T and B cells specific to that pathogen. These are basic components of your adaptive immune system. After the pathogen is cleared, most of those pathogen-specific cells are also cleared from the body, but your immune system knows to hold on to a few of them, called memory T and B cells. Think of your body's memory of the spike protein as a sort of mugshot it can use to quickly identify COVID and respond. When COVID enters your body, if your immune system has a mugshot of the virus, it can much more quickly and easily mount defenses. It might even clear the virus before it causes any symptoms. Your body recognizes the spike protein. Now, what happens when mutations appear on the spike protein? Well, that protein becomes harder and harder for the body to recognize. A couple mutations might be analogous to the criminal in your mugshot putting on a wig. But the Delta variant, for example, had over a dozen mutations on the spike protein. That starts to be more similar to a full body makeover with nose job and BBL. The Omicron variant has 30 mutations on the spike. It's getting more and more difficult for your body to recognize the virus as the criminal from your immune system mugshot. In other words, it's getting more and more difficult for your body to match the protein it remembers from your vaccinations with the protein in the newest COVID variant, especially since so few people get updated shots. And of course, the mutations haven't stopped. Omicron is quite genetically distant from Delta. JN1 is quite genetically distant from Omicron. The greater the genetic distance between the spike protein and your vaccine, which for most people are the ones they received in 2021, years ago now, and the spike protein of the actually currently circulating virus, the less effective the vaccines become. From a previous Gauntlet article, quote, last year, a study looking at data from 2022 to 2023 found that children under 5 who received the bivalent boosters had an 80% reduction in risk of ER visits, whereas those who received the original series Moderna shots, like not the updated ones, had only a 29% reduction in the risk of ER visits. Studies continually find that the new subvariants, quote, escape neutralizing antibodies induced by both vaccination and infection. Studies continually, let's just read that again. Studies continually find that new subvariants escape neutralizing antibodies, that is, antibodies your body produces to neutralize them, induced by both vaccination and infection. So no matter whether your immunity is coming from a vaccine or a previous infection, the subvariants are evolving to escape your body's response. So the more updated the shot you can get, the better. But as we're covering in the opening of this, they really can't keep up. They're updating them like once a year, and it'll already be 3 or 4 variants behind where it needs to be by the time it's released and people are actually getting it. COVID's ability to mutate underscores the need for people to get boosted because older shots are more out of date and thus less effective. The media's continual downplaying of COVID, their claims that COVID is, quote, over because we are, quote, vaccinated now, have actually led to a widespread reluctance to get boosters, which the media then turns around and hand-wrings over. Why would people rush out to get a new vaccine, though, when they've been told that the virus is no big deal, and I would add that their old vaccine is still working, when it isn't? It's also an odd choice to call the updated vaccines boosters, as this seems to imply a topping up of a shot you already received. We generally don't call flu shots boosters because they are different shots, formulated for different variants that are circulating that year or that are predicted to circulate that year. So are the updated COVID vaccines. So they're not really the same shot, although I guess you can get the original shot, although it's not really that effective. But yeah, it is a new shot rather than a booster. It's not a boost of the same thing. It's updated. But the institutional desire, and this is the key, the institutional desire to minimize the ongoing issue of unmitigated COVID has led to governments and media to be cagey about this. How and why does mutation happen? And why does the virus keep becoming more vaccine resistant? Well, using the vaccine as our first rather than our last line of defense, like it should be the last line of defense because it only comes into play after you've already gotten infected, and you should have lots of protections from ever getting infected, whether it's a mask, whether it is ventilation and filtration, including also like UV lights and the filters. There should be many, many other factors, and then that only comes into play after they've all failed and you got infected. So anyway, mutations occur randomly. When a pathogen copies itself, those copies contain random genetic mistakes, also known as mutations, that make the pathogen either more or less fit for the environment that they're in. We call the genetically distinct copies variants. The less fit copies are outcompeted and they die out. The more fit copies are able to make more copies of themselves and become more common, crowding out the other ones. If the new variant happens to be very fit, meaning that it is very well adapted to its environment, it might start to outcompete the dominant strain and ultimately replace it, which is basically a cycle that happens like every 4 months or so. Sometimes it takes a little longer, sometimes it happens a little faster, but yeah, anywhere from like 2 to 6 months, you're getting a new dominant strain. And when that happens, you usually see like a big spike in cases. Why? Because people haven't been infected with that strain yet and they get sick, because their system can't fight it off, can't recognize it and fight it off as quickly. Now, what happens when COVID begins to encounter a lot of vaccine protection? The predominant variant is unable to spread and it starts to die out. This is what was happening in summer 2021 when Biden declared victory. COVID was finding fewer hosts to safely reproduce in. But because COVID mutated so quickly and with a high degree of genetic variance, some of the original strain's children happened to be good at outwitting vaccine protection. For simplicity's sake, let's say that the Wuhan strain has 10 children, and 9 of them are easily identified by the vaccinated body as looking similar to the immune system's mugshot. Which one survives to duplicate itself? Well, that's right, the highly divergent strain, that 1 out of 10, meaning genetically different. It's the one that the vaccinated body couldn't recognize. Thus, the more the virus encounters the vaccine and the more it's allowed to replicate among vaccinated people, the higher the likelihood of developing highly divergent, highly fit strains that evade vaccine protection. That's why a vaccine should be the last line of defense that COVID encounters, not the first. With clean air provided by new, high-quality ventilation standards and HEPA filtration, and you can do this at home by making a Corsi Rosenthal box, CORSI-Rosenthal, Look it up. Cost you about $90 to $100. You get 4 furnace filters, MERV 13 rating or better, and a box fan and some duct tape, and boom, you got a high quality air filter that can actually suck the SARS coronavirus 2 out of the air, and a lot of other stuff: dust, smoke, other pathogens. Anyway, along with the implementation of new technologies like FAR UVC, ultraviolet light C, along with normalizing mask wearing, the virus would encounter fewer humans and fewer vaccines. It would then have fewer opportunities to learn how to evade the vaccines. Let's take a step back. None of this means that vaccines cause mutation or variants. Yeah, that happens on its own. Mutation and variants happen whether people are vaccinated or not. Because again, where does a mutation come from? It's when the genetic copies are made, when the virus is replicated, there are errors in the replication. It's not perfect. And that's mutation. It's random. It just happens out of defects in the replication process. And, so then you get a genetically distinct individual emerging. And it may or may not survive better than the old one. So anyway, yeah, it's not because of the vaccines. What it means is that vaccination puts evolutionary pressure on the virus to become better at hiding from vaccine protection. Infection similarly puts evolutionary pressure on the virus to evade immune memory. That's exactly what happened and continues to happen. The variants that are better at hiding from vaccine protection and from prior immunity through infection go on to become dominant. That's why, even though you already had COVID 2 or 3 or 4 times, you're going to get it again. So mask up. This is not a very sustainable approach to controlling a virus. In fact, it is the opposite of controlling a virus. The one component of this strategy, if you can call it that quote, protects us from infection is infection. In other words, not everyone gets sick at the same time, but that's only because we're all getting sick over and over again. And every time you do that, it takes a toll on your body, by the way. It weakens your heart, might weaken your brain, might weaken your pancreas, your kidneys, might take up residence in your gut, create all kinds of other problems, etc. Like, those repeated infections are not without consequence, whether or not you die. It's just crazy how people have come to think about these things and the forms of denial people have taken up. The vaccine-only strategy relies on the infections and deaths of vulnerable people as part and parcel of this reinfection normalization to maintain an unsteady form of homeostasis with the virus. It's this form of, quote, balanced coexistence with the virus that governments are now trying to incorrectly label herd immunity. In the context of COVID, this new definition of herd, as in herd immunity, simply means that everyone has some degree of immunity from their previous infection, which will get topped up by their next infection. It's a strategy that not only produces forever reinfections, it is dependent upon forever reinfections. Not only doesn't protect vulnerable people, it is dependent on harming and killing them. It not only can't prevent reinfections, it incorporates continual reinfections as critical to its, quote, success. Note, this decision to throw everyone under the bus of recurring infections has worsened, not ended, the unsustainable pressure on health systems globally. I've spoken a lot about vulnerable people, but it's inaccurate to frame the needs of vulnerable people as contrary to the needs of the rest of the people. This is a rhetorical and political trick that the media has engaged in since Omicron Wave 1, when it became clear that vulnerable people could not and would not be protected by vaccines alone. Instead of acknowledging that the vaccine-only strategy was based on bad science and wouldn't work to end the pandemic, the media persuaded regular, or not at much elevated risk people who have, quote, nothing to fear from COVID, which is ridiculous. Anybody can get long COVID. Some people are more likely to get it than others, but anybody can get it. And we don't know who is going to and who isn't. They got the less at-risk people to turn on the more at-risk people who very rudely won't let us get back to normal because of, their selfish desire to do stuff like keep being alive and not die. I'm sorry, but, your needs are conflicting with my haircut or whatever. Now, conservatives had always embraced that type of framing. From day one, Republican politicians and news organizations like Fox raged that we were all being held in a horrible state of captivity, meaning wearing masks and not dining indoors, by the terrible, rude, selfish, vulnerable people who should just go die. But Omicron was the point at which it became clear that also the Democratic Party's approach to protecting vulnerable people, vaccine only, had failed. And it's at this point at which liberal outlets also began to subtly adopt this Republican framing. Suddenly it wasn't stay at home to save a life. It was, well, stay home if you're at risk. In other words, the rest of us are going to go do all the things we want to do, but you can't and you're not going to hold us back. Suddenly it wasn't my mask protects you, your mask protects me. It was, geez, some people are really annoying about masks. Collective health became personal risk assessment. And we read an article about this before, and I mentioned it before. The Biden administration killed the collective response to the pandemic. And that's exactly what it is. You can't do pandemic. You can't respond to something that is globally spreading based on just personal choices. Like, we live in a society. It's a fact. The point at which COVID proved it would continue to evade our vaccines was the point at which liberals decided that harming vulnerable people was okay after all. Because at that point, the conservatives, they had the lower threshold there of when they would decide to genocide by infection was acceptable. The liberals had a higher threshold for it, but at some point, that convenience factor means you have to die. Breaking the solidarity that had arisen between members of the public, particularly liberals and those on the left with disabled people, required the continual reframing of COVID as a problem that was over, that had become mild, and or that couldn't be controlled. It also involved reframing the most vulnerable, those we'd organized the COVID response to protect initially, as annoying, bad, possibly crazy, and definitely mean. We see that perception echoed everywhere today, even among leftists touting solidarity as the great principle of community organizing, which it is. Instead of engaging with real concerns about the safety of constantly reinfecting everybody with COVID, which, it should be clear, is not at all safe and inarguably awful for everybody's health, people who don't want to mitigate often go on the attack against vulnerable people, calling them names and mocking them. This is a weakness on the left that is being exploited to normalize unprecedented levels of illness among the entire public, not only the vulnerable. Let me add that we recognize in studying anti-revisionist Marxism-Leninism and all of the various trends of revisionism that have cropped up across the history of Marxism and Marxism-Leninism and where they come from. And a lot of it is in the imperialist countries, the influence of, all of that bourgeois culture and news media and everything, all of the bourgeois messaging. It starts to penetrate to some extent, either wittingly or unwittingly, into the communist vanguard even. We're the people that are the most studied and the most class conscious, but there are even those in the vanguard who, have a lapse and allow that influence in, and they start letting their proletarian ideology get corrupted by capitalist ideas. And so, it's hard because, with COVID here's an example. We'd started to build that solidarity and we'd started to build that understanding. And then it starts to get eroded by the bourgeois messaging. And you've seen this even in communist parties. And we're going to talk about that in the next article. But you've seen this even in communist parties and really the world over, more or less, that COVID is somehow over-ish and that we can kind of just move on, etc. And no, this is, coming from bourgeois interests and bourgeois needs. And, they're struggling to get the economy going again after the economy was kind of already heading into a recession in 2019. And then the tipping point of the pandemic and all the public health interventions that needed to be done to prevent the virus from getting totally out of control up front did cause a recession. It was over quickly. They tried to do the reopening, but the reopening has been sluggish. In China and elsewhere, the numbers haven't really fully bounced back, and it's still kind of struggling along. And this is because a lot of workers still don't want to go back to work in the same way. They have health problems now. They're cognizant and conscious of the risk of going back and getting COVID again. And I mean, just a lot of stuff has happened in the last 4 years that have created a massive drag on business as usual. But they need the yield, they need the profits, and they need to try to fight that drag by, any kind of pressure and messaging that they can do. And that's where this is coming from. And we have to reject that as socialists. We have to reject it. So anyway, now, what are the results? Student absences are record high. Whole economies, and this is a reference to Germany, we're going to take a peek at this in a second, are entering recession because of the unprecedented number of workers' sick days. And long COVID continues to move formerly abled people into the vulnerable category. I mean, I learned a lot about, let's just say I learned a lot more about disability during the pandemic than I ever had known about it before, because I was suddenly contending with conditions I never had before. And I get it. It's really hard to be disabled to any extent in a society like the United States. This capitalism has really little to no empathy, caring, or concern for people with disabilities. This was something that the pandemic really opened my eyes to, and a lot of people have been people who've been dealing with things since birth and so on have known for a long time. And I think a lot more people found out about it during the pandemic. And solidarity, we need to bring all this together. Because you see it like in the eugenics movements back a century ago of what are we going to do with disabled people? I don't know, just kill them, I guess. That never really went away. There have been just different degrees of just kill them, I guess, But needs to be chucked overboard entirely. Will take a revolution to do that. Anyway, finishing this up, there's just 2 more screens. Breaking solidarity will never, ever put the left in a place of strength. Not when it comes to trans people, not when it comes to immigrants, not when it comes to disabled people. The media framed public health, the thing that protects vulnerable people, but also everyone, as contrary to the interests of the majority. Yeah, you're with one of those special interests, the majority of the population. In this case, those interests are go back to normal and pretend nothing's happening. In reality, we all benefit from public health and disease mitigation. Just as welfare and housing for the homeless and raising the minimum wage is in the interest of everyone in society, I guess we could say fighting for better living and working conditions and more power under capitalism on the way up to challenging capitalism for power itself, is in the interest of everyone in society, so too is mitigating disease instead of letting it run rampant. The government has a responsibility. Well, government's responsibility is to profit first. In capitalism, you have the Piaf principle. Profit is always first. If you can't understand why a decision is being made by a capitalist government, remember Piaf. Profit is always first. Always. Okay. Yeah. Always. I can hear people now, but what? No. Always. Okay. The government has a responsibility, or ideally a government which is actually serving the people and accountable to the majority of the population, would have a responsibility to mitigate COVID by cleaning the air, just as it has a responsibility to mitigate cholera by cleaning the water. Instead, the media has people arguing on behalf of allowing viruses to spread freely. That is a coup of state propaganda, nothing less. When people claim we are in a different place because of the vaccines, I know they have not engaged with the science around COVID since 2021. Vaccines that were initially thought to prevent infection and confer long-term immunity were found to be capable of neither. The virus mutated faster than expected, and updated vaccines continue to trail viral evolution by a year or more. The herd immunity strategy that Biden and the CDC openly pursued failed and collapsed into a forever reinfection nightmare. That's where we are. Vaccines reduce the risk of death and severe outcomes, including long COVID. We should all get boosted because it's better for your vaccine protection to more closely match the genetics of the dominant variant. But reduce and more closely isn't enough to get us back to normal when this virus is circulating at high levels year-round, reinfecting people within months and leaving a devastating trail of disabling long-term illness. We also know that more COVID reinfections increase your cumulative risk of long COVID. So let's say that your first COVID infection gives you a 3% chance of getting long COVID. I think it's actually higher than that, but let's just say for the sake of argument 3. Well, then your second is going to give you a 5% chance of getting long COVID. Your third will give you a 7, and so on. So every time you get it, you're more likely to get more serious consequences from it. So again, those numbers are example only. Don't quote me on that. Those are not backed by data. But that's how the principle works of your odds go up every time. What then is going to happen to those, quote, regular people after 10 infections or 20? Well, we're going to find out at this rate. The public needs to stop framing vulnerable people who are simply warning the public of the fate that awaits them after X number of reinfections, like you are disabling yourself by getting reinfected over and over, and you're going to wind up just like where the highest risk people were at the start, as the enemy. The enemy is the unmitigated spread of this virus that is continuing to produce vaccine-resistant variants, which we can't possibly keep pace with. The enemy is the institutions that want to buy a feeble form of temporary immunity with our health and our lives. The enemy is the propaganda campaign that has everyone claiming loudly and confidently that COVID is over while catching it for the 5th time in 4 years. The enemy is the utter destruction of public health for the sake of a normal that isn't coming back. That's the end of the article, and I think that as we head into the economic downturn, which probably will be quite severe like another 2008 in the next year or two, you better believe normal isn't coming back. And from now until the end of capitalism, which hopefully is not, the end of capitalism is either going to happen when capitalism renders the planet uninhabitable and there's ecological collapse, or it will end when the proletariat gets organized to end it. One of the two, and literally there isn't a third option. This is coming. Normal is not coming back. This is something I've had to really accept. Like growing up in the late 20th century and thinking life was going to be a certain way, and then getting into the early 21st century as a young adult, and then having to be like, oh, so there's a war on terror, and there's a Department of Homeland Security, and there's a gigantic recession, and there's another gigantic recession, and now there's austerity, and now there's all this stuff starting up. It's just what you thought life was going to be like is not coming back. It's going to get tighter and tighter and tighter and more fraught and more fraught and more fraught. There might be a couple of years here and there, pockets of when prices come back down and things are affordable for a brief time and they make concessions. Overall, we're in the terminal phases of the system where it's going to have crises that are harder and harder for it to restructure itself after. And the result is going to be social chaos until there is a new organizing principle brought about by a new organized power in society. And that has to be the proletariat. The capitalist elements in society have shot their shot. They're done. This is the end of their system. And there's really nothing but, just like we're doing in Fascism and Social Revolution that I just put up, all it can produce at this point is disease and death. So that's, definitely right in line with what we were just reading here. Quick follow-up with this, and this is just one page and we'll go back to the chat. That Gauntlet article, again by Julia Doubleday, which they referenced in that piece, this is from late January 2024, so a few months ago. Germany entered a recession last year because the average worker needed 20 sick days. Pitting public health against economic health is fundamentally wrong and will lead to the utter destruction of both. A new study from Germany confirms what COVID-informed doctors, researchers, patients, and allies have been expecting for years. Record high sick days in 2023 pushed the nation into economic recession. So, is reopening working? Nah. All right, let's go into chat. We have another article that gets even more focused, criticizing how CPUSA has bought into the back to normal thing. That coming up on the other side of the chat. But let's see what's going on with people. Scrolling up here to wherever we left off. All right, there we are. Speaking of super spreader events, I heard that Lady Gaga recently admitted she performed like 4 or 5 live shows while COVID positive. Yeah, it's, I mean, a direct result of not taking this thing seriously. So, yeah. Thanks for still discussing the negative effects of COVID. I joined right on that portion. Yeah, that's basically today's stream is all about COVID. Unfortunately, we had some technical issues earlier. I read like 3 articles on more like the medical side of COVID, some studies, and also a thing on masks, how N95 masks work really well at preventing virus at source control. So if you wear them while you're sick, it prevents 98% of the viral particles that you'd be expelling. So if all sick people wore masks, there'd be 2% of the spread or less, because they might not even be able, in the 2% that they're expelling, they might not even be able to expel an effective dose to infect somebody else. So yeah, like right there, you could stop COVID by having everybody who's sick wear a mask. But apparently that's too much to ask. Some trauma is coming back to me around this. I had a roommate die to COVID. I'm really sorry to hear that. I think that's another reason, to be honest, why I haven't been discussing. I took a break from discussing it. Like I said, I didn't stop masking. I didn't stop taking COVID seriously. I just literally needed a break from talking about it because I was getting into a really bad place talking about it so much. But yeah, we have to talk about it every once in a while. So yeah. Did anyone notice how the Bolivian people outnumber the military in the coup attempt? Yeah, so I didn't have time to get into that today. But as far as just other current events, yeah, I understand there was a military coup attempt yesterday in Bolivia that was stopped by more democratic forces. So see if we can do a community post on that. Welcome, Doug. Long time no see. I know. So I've been super, super busy the last month, and I haven't been streaming as much, which actually has been good because then I'm fresher when I come back for the stream. But I have some more time this week, and I want to make a point of trying to catch up. Speaking of BBL, it's crazy how many people still do it despite the enormous evidence that a lot of people die from it. This is not even life-saving surgery that you're forced to undergo. It's cosmetic. So, interesting. This is giving me some ideas for building Corsi Rosenthal boxes at the makerspace I work at. Good learning project for kids. Absolutely. And you know, I've been meaning to actually put up a picture. I recently changed the filters on my first Corsi Rosenthal box, and just running them for like, you know, garbage that was floating around in the air. I mean, they turned like purple, basically. They got really, really dark after running them for like a year. And so just the amount of damage you're saving your lungs and the amount of particulate matter that you're preventing from getting into your lungs that your lungs have to cope with and try to figure out a way to expel is enormous. So yeah, and I'm sitting right next to a Corsi Rosenthal box now that's just a couple months old. It's like already getting a little gray. So I mean, there's a lot more stuff in the air than you might realize, and it's worth running it just for that. This whole framing of the Republican framing and the Democratic framing is funny. I mean, I think it's accurate. I'm not really sure about it. It's funny, but I thought it was pretty accurate. So both sides wanted to genocide everyone. I mean, yeah, like I would summarize it as that like they had different thresholds at which point, you know, the lack of convenience became unbearable to the point of supporting genocide. But yeah, I remember Biden saying that he had a plan. He never had a COVID plan. Yeah. I mean, it was, yeah, not different than Trump's plan. Yeah. Biden's plan for COVID was the same as for every other problem. Pretend it doesn't exist and continue passing legislation that benefits capital. There you go. Hello, Ivan. Presidential debates tonight. Yeah, we were talking about that earlier. Finding a job right now is impossible. Somebody says I can attest to that. I got really suckered with my last full-time job, and I'm looking for a replacement right now. I quit as a general manager last year and struggled to find even entry-level restaurant work. I was lucky to find my new position when I moved. Yeah. I mean, the stuff going on with the job market, we've talked about the housing market, we've talked about the car market, the across the board cost of living crisis. The amount of fuckery, just general tricks and, no good actions in the job market is crazy. Like companies that just have like permanently posted job openings that they are not actually hiring for. So you apply to these things, you give them all your personal information. You never really even had a chance of getting an interview. That's just the level of like scam that the economy is devolving into now. And it's like really, these things are becoming common, widespread practices. I'm glad I have my makerspace job. It's peanuts, but peanuts are better than nothing. True. I'm the only one who masks in my office, and in the past 7 months, I have the attendance by far. Yeah. I mean, people don't talk about it so much, but the toll is still being taken. The toll is still occurring. I'm not following the suggestion here that anyone was advocating for letting COVID run rampant. Did you miss when Biden did Vax and Relax in May 2021 and did the whole thing where he took the mask off in the video and stuff? That's called letting COVID run rampant. When you know that the vaccines are not actually preventing infections anymore, like they were at first, okay? And so that was then, but that was way premature. We needed a lot more data, and we need a lot more people to get vaccinated. He wanted to do it before the summer vacation season. Like it was entirely economically motivated. And it was not supported by science. We're a year and a half at that point into a like once in a century pandemic event, hopefully a once in a century pandemic event. And there just, a lot more information was needed to make a call like that. It was way premature. And what happened? We got Omicron that fall, and then things went back to in-person schools, K through graduate school. I mean, it's just completely fucked up. I don't know how you don't see that as just advocating for letting it rip, because that's exactly what it was. I am also the only one in my office still masking, and my boss lately is questioning the effectiveness of masks. My boss is also a liberal, and it's fascinating to see their metaphorical mask fall off. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they basically are just falling into agreeing with conservatives, which was the point that article made. Liberals just had like a different threshold where that got triggered. And actually, on the point of masks, let me put something up on the screen here. So people have pointed out that New York City Mayor Eric Adams is trying to ban masks. I didn't actually put this in my show notes, but it's right here, so let's do it. So there it is. Assembly members Jeff Dinowitz, D. Bronx, Brian Cunningham, D. Brooklyn, Niley Rosick in Queens, Rosich, Queens, D. Queens. These are all Democrats. Jennifer Rajkumar, D. Queens, to discuss legislative effort. Officials, quote, "We are coming together to call for a safer New York and to speak unequivocally with one voice when we say that KKK tactics will no longer be tolerated in our state." What are you talking about? Let's find out. After months of escalating terror across New York, as Jews have been targeted, harassed, and terrorized by individuals who hide their identities with masks and face coverings to act with impunity in episodes that recall horrifying racist moments in American history, diverse civil rights leaders, faith leaders, and legislators agree that enough is enough, and it is high time to reinstate a law to counter masked intimidation in New York. Hashtag Unmask Hate New York is a coalition of leaders who are joining together for a safer New York and will speak unequivocally with one voice that Ku Klux Klan tactics will no longer be tolerated in New York. So this is an effort to ban masks. Not going to go over well, particularly in the fall and winter. I've already seen like Dr. Lucky Tran on social media speaking against this. And yeah, so the fight is on to try to... Eric Adams has been terrible. I mean, when he announced he was getting paid in Bitcoin, in the beginning. You knew things were not going to get real progressive under in the city under his reign, but that is foul. It's disgusting. What else do we have here going on in the chat? Effective masking can be effective. Yep, we just did a whole thing about how N95s are effective. I recall the straight lie the CDC told us about masking and explicitly refusing to differentiate among masking types. Yep. So according to the study we just read, duckbill N95s are the most effective, but N95s in general more. And actually they found cloth masks, or at least like full face kind of cloth masks, not real small ones. Some people like have a mask the size of like a postage stamp over their face, expected to do anything, and doesn't. But actually, they found the cloth masks were more effective than the KN95s, because the KN95s tended to have more air coming out around the sides. Profits over everything is probably why they want to go the repeat infection route, get people good and hospitalized and disabled, so they have to pay large sums of money just to survive or have a good quality of life. I mean, I'm sure the medical industry doesn't mind that. Really, though, it's just a byproduct of not interrupting the rest of business as usual, which would require accommodations and cost to the capitalists collectively. There is always the issue with facial hair and not being able to create a seal for the mask. So I've actually seen a fix for that. So there are people who, like, for religious reasons, for example, have beards. And what they do, if you're working like a medical setting in particular, you can, you don't have to shave the beard, as I saw one racist administrator saying at one point. You don't have to do that. You can just take, there's like a kind of elastic that is several inches wide and it's thin. And people use it as like resistance training, kind of strength training stuff. Anyway, there's a way that you can wrap it around your head that it, just tucks away the beard basically and creates a smooth surface on your face. Then you can mask over that and you don't have to shave. So that actually does work. But yeah, that's like, for people who don't want to stand out by wearing a mask, that's like another level of weird. Okay, so we are caught up with the chat. I will now go into the last article of today, and I actually just need to figure out, because my mod tools are not working. I can't pin anything, and I can't kick trolls, and I really don't know why. I even reopened the moderation page, and I just don't know what is going on there. See what we can do here. That was happening to me the other day as well on my own stream. Oh well, I'm collecting the names. We'll just deal with them later. For those with facial hair, you can look into getting neck gaiters. All right, so let's get into our final article or set of articles for today. And so, let me get it on the screen. People might be familiar with SCORE, which is a socialist group doing organizing around COVID issues. And I've been in touch with one of the founders of SCORE, and they're doing good work and putting out good messaging there. And so this year, about 6 weeks ago, they published this. It's called Reflections on the CPUSA Pre-Convention Discussion Document and its Discrepancies with Practical Experience, an open letter from SCORE to the CPUSA, dated May 10, 2024. And so it says, the following is a response to the CPUSA's pre-convention discussion document, which can be read here. So, we are alarmed at the erasure of the lives and contributions of people with disabilities from the CPUSA's main discussion document of the 2024 CPUSA convention. This document summarizes the last 12 months of leftist organizing throughout the U.S. in response to fascist policies. However, it's difficult to tell which country this discussion paper is referring to, since the USA has not, quote, recovered from COVID as it expresses. Actually, the ruling class of America has demonstrated clear support in blatant denial of COVID, and CPUSA leadership is following suit. Despite active obfuscation and undercounting, COVID remains the fourth leading cause of death in the United States and directly contributes to the top three leading causes of death: heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, even possibly cancer. The working class, particularly Black, Indigenous, and people of color, bear the greatest share of the mortality and disease burden of COVID. This is in addition to the ongoing and significant increase in disability rates attributable to long COVID, i.e. PASC. 4 years of trying to live with COVID has resulted in over 13 million Americans having their lives changed forever due to disability from SARS coronavirus 2. At the January Senate Committee hearing on long COVID, Dr. Ziad Al-Ali testified that, quote, "The best way to prevent long COVID is to prevent COVID in the first place. The path forward is clear." That was the end of that quote. "All organizers seeking to mobilize the proletariat must keep the disabled at the center of praxis and work with organizations like ours to mitigate the risk of COVID infection." The focus on disabled persons is important. As a key component of the reserve army of labor, disabled persons are very deliberately positioned as a threat, implicit and explicit, to the working class. One of the key actions we need our comrades to do is to make the connections that the destruction of public health and consequent ongoing and increasing rates of disability due to COVID are a means for the ruling class to weaken our capacity to fight back against accelerating fascism. Disabled persons have noted from the beginning of the present pandemic that past pandemics have led to increases in fascism. That is the pattern we are repeating here. The 1918 flu, combined with the many disabled soldiers after World War I, led to an increase in need for public assistance for disabled persons. This led directly to the eugenics movement in the Nazi Party, which was enthusiastically taken up by doctors in Germany, leading to the extermination of hundreds of thousands of disabled persons. Disabled persons are framed as a burden to the public and then disposed of under fascism. We will not allow this historic pattern to continue repeating itself. Disability liberation is key to fighting fascism. Communists in the US need to see clearly how the abandonment of public health by the ruling class benefits the rich and powerful today, just as it did in Marx's time for the factory owners to ignore tuberculosis precautions. To the capitalist, the worker is disposable. There is no care for their safety or health except how they intersect with profit. Communists must not allow that same apathy toward the needs and dangers faced by our comrades. We can follow the clear science that has stated repeated COVID infection leads to increased rates and risks of disability. COVID dysregulates the immune system, leading to more susceptibility to future opportunistic illnesses, in addition to the impacts on brain function, cardiovascular health, and other vascular impacts. According to the CPUSA pre-convention discussion document, the statement, quote, "The country recovered from COVID," is, unfortunately, bourgeois propaganda, a return back to consumer capitalism, a bitter, invented reality in the parenti sense. The only sense in which we recovered from COVID is from an anti-human, anti-communist perspective that centers bourgeois economic recovery. The present circumstances evidence a new era of the disciplining of labor by the capitalist class. Boy howdy. CPUSA has a coherent analysis of these impacts while neglecting the cause and its interconnections. The bourgeoisie have successfully pressed America's politics toward fascism, and yet the CPUSA neglects to recognize that a key pillar of fascist policy is the dismantling of public health. This is seen in the quote-unquote ending of the COVID pandemic. The repressive power of fascist policies is felt in the social exclusion of anyone who does not have the health privilege to engage in a broader community. With this in mind, any organization which obeys the bourgeoisie propaganda, despite learning the truth about COVID, is complicit not only in disability erasure, but in the active maiming and killing of their communities and organizers. The unconscious capitulation to social pressures, this is exactly what we were talking about before, allows the reproduction of the fascist policies that CPUSA decries. If CPUSA continues to organize the way the bourgeoisie wants them to, then it is clear why we continue to lose. We also know who we lose. COVID overwhelmingly continues to impact people of color, the working class, and disabled people the hardest. The imperialist system does not value the lives of the proletariat, it consumes them through overwork and exposure to disease. This is no revolution, it is capitalism. It is critical that the CPUSA and the broader left prioritize the safety of our organizers and our communities so that we can continue to build the revolution that we so desperately need. Just like in Marx's time, public health is key to effective organizing. This is a call to action. Securing clean air is as critical as securing bread. Yeah, that's a very true statement. Capital needs us to have neither in order to maintain its power. From Marx himself, in reference to the Factory Act of 1864, quote, "It has been stated over and over again that the English doctors are unanimous in declaring that where the work is continuous, 8 feet apart is the very least space that should be allowed for each person. The very root of the capitalist mode of production, i.e. the self-expansion of all capital, large or small, by means of the, quote, free purchase and consumption of labor power, would be attacked. Factory legislation is therefore brought to a deadlock before these 8 feet of breathing space. The sanitary officers, the industrial inquiry commissioners, the factory inspectors, all harp over and over again upon the necessity for those 8 feet and upon the impossibility of wringing them out of capital. They thus, in fact, declare that tuberculosis and other lung diseases among the workpeople are necessary conditions to the existence of capital," unquote. Capital has deemed COVID a necessary condition in order to maintain its existence. Therefore, taking COVID seriously directly attacks capital. Let's say that again. Capital has deemed COVID a necessary condition to maintain its existence, insofar as it cannot do the things required to eliminate COVID, and it fears for its existence if it were to do those things. Therefore, taking COVID seriously directly attacks capital. It inspires existential dread in capital. Further evidence is in the recent actions of capital. It was the CEO of Delta Airlines who dictated that we should decrease isolation times in a December 2021 letter to the CDC. A capitalist changed public health policy, not professional analysis of research. The CDC has removed COVID protections altogether, relegating it to the status of other common respiratory illnesses. National precedent has now been set by the California Supreme Court that no employer is responsible for COVID spread at their businesses solely to avoid a, quote, never-ending chain of liability, unquote, for those businesses. And let me remind you that Nancy Pelosi in 2020 said that the Democrats' refusal to extend the benefits, which I think ran out in August 2020, up through the election, Biden only brought them back in January. They refused to do that because the Republicans, those nasty Republicans, were trying to do a slush fund and also get rid of corporate liability for people getting sick at their businesses. Well, yeah, we don't want that, except it's a joke that the Democrats were ever going to do anything about that, because this is exactly what we've gotten with Democrats in power, is no accountability for employers and businesses that allow the spread of COVID and contribute to the ongoing pandemic and all of the disability, death, and other harm. Capital will never protect the interests of workers or communities because the conditions of capital's profits are the conditions of our death. This is a critique toward the Communist Party USA. The party can only fulfill its mandate by acknowledging COVID, mitigating its spread, and organizing to bring that safety to all. If, quote, the role of the Communist Party is to bring issues of the oppressed forward and organize around them, unquote, then we must adapt the party to the present. One of the main sources of strength in the labor movements of the past was sharing a common vision, not just for the future, but for our present moment. Our present is characterized by COVID, and no amount of wishful thinking, neglectful politics, or elite pandering will change it. A party that acts otherwise only contributes to the continued oppression of the proletariat. When we ignore COVID protections in organizing spaces, the very air itself will keep people who know the consequences of COVID away. Yeah. We do not make a space safe by requesting safe behaviors. We mandate the behavior and enforce compliance. It may sound absurd to the reader to mandate masks to keep people safe from COVID rather than, quote, advising that people mask, but consider how we treat racist or sexually violent conduct. We do not request that members avoid being racist. We do not advise that members refrain from sexually harassing one another or assaulting one another. These are requirements to be in our spaces to make them safe for everyone. Spreading disease to our comrades can only harm our movements. Enforcing COVID protection, though, makes spaces safer for everyone, including immunocompromised, vulnerable, and disabled people. And you may not realize that you are at risk until after the COVID infection that gives you a chronic condition for several years or possibly permanently. The path forward is clear. Any movement or group that seeks to uplift the oppressed needs to center the disabled and mitigate the risk of COVID infection. We agitate for mitigation such as mandating masking, free distribution of disposable respirators, improved ventilation, subsidized upgraded air filtration systems, and free widespread testing. We must continue to educate on the pandemic as an ongoing, mass-disabling event, and we must organize together to achieve all our goals. The path forward is at the center of our organization. For more information, or if you would like to work with us at SCORE, please visit socialist-core.org. So socialist-core.org. There we go. Socialist-core.org. So there are two follow-ups to this. The first one is a response to SCORE from a CPUSA member. So this was an open letter. Somebody, in this case Moshe Pinero, responded on May 12, 2024. Then we have SCORE's response to this letter, and that'll wrap it up. So Moshe Pinero is a member of the Communist Party USA. Oh, I should also add, this was published in Geese magazine, in case you're wondering where this is from. Okay. Who requested to keep their real identity anonymous. Okay. This letter was written in response to a letter published by SCORE on the forum on May 10. And that can be read here. That's the thing that we just read. So what is the response? The COVID-19 pandemic critically altered the landscape of many facets of social, political, and economic life in every single nation on the globe. Yeah. Feelings of isolation and discontent with the response from elected officials, along with economic precarity, prevailed in the minds of many, especially in the United States. In many ways, these ideas still dominate conscious and unconscious collective thinking of the masses of working Americans. The landscape of 2024, that is, the social, political, and economic landscape, would not be what it is without the events of 2020, marked by not only the COVID-19 pandemic, but Black Lives Matter mass movement and presidential election as well. And arguably, we had so much demonstrating in the streets because people didn't have to go to work because everything was shut down because of the pandemic. Because we really haven't had anything like that since, I think, and it really stopped, at least to the extent that it was going on, when people had to go back to work, when that was lifted. So, as I said in many videos at the time, there were just piles of bone dry kindling lying around of people's grievances. And, particularly with the racial injustice and the police violence and all that stuff. But there's so many grievances going around, and there's overlap between a lot of them. And then it was like, as soon as people didn't have to go to work for a few weeks, people were out in the streets, like, tearing the country apart. That's how frustrated people are. So, yeah, anyway, I think that didn't go away. Just people aren't capable of expressing it now because they had to go back to work. But it's still there. It's still there. Careful study of these events and the cascade of problems. But let me add, this is also a presidential year. We haven't seen anything like it yet so far, and we're almost into July. So something to note. Oftentimes there is an uptick in protest activity in presidential election years. We're not really seeing that so far. I think that is part of this lingering malaise and just the clouds hanging over. People are being squeezed so hard. They're exhausted. Some of that is just conditions. Some of it's people are literally not the same as they were before the pandemic. We never really took the time to grieve it or anything. It's just been like back to work, back to normal, back to normal, back to normal, which is just a form of denial. Anyway, careful study of these events and the cascade of problems that have arisen because of them is essential to understand the necessary political tasks before us for the foreseeable future. Recently, a letter from a collective called SCORE was written and addressed to the Communist Party USA regarding language used in the main document main discussion document for the pre-convention period titled Forward Together for Pre-Convention Discussion. Within their letter, they state discontent with language used surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. And let me just say, before we go into this any further, I think that I don't really see a reason why anybody in CPUSA, although they tend to be defensive about fucking everything, and very kind of cult-like responses to criticism, I find. That's been my experience with communicating with people in CPUSA on social media. Just it's very cult-like, shut down, and they start changing the subject and all kinds of other stuff. Do not take criticism well whatsoever, and that's something I've seen for a while. But I don't think anything SCORE said was really objectionable. They're just like, don't call the pandemic over. It isn't. Here are the reasons why. Take this more seriously. Now, why the response to this can't be, okay, good point, we'll do that, I don't know. But I don't think that that's what's going to happen in this letter. But let's see. Specifically, they take issue with the phrase, the country recovered from COVID, arguing that the country hasn't actually recovered. It hasn't. And thus, the CPUSA is ignoring that, quote, key pillar of fascist policy is the dismantling of public health. And yes, how many fascists have you seen denying COVID, doing anti-vax stuff? That is still ongoing today. Yes, that is absolutely true. While it is true that the COVID-19 pandemic still profoundly impacts poor, Black and brown and disabled individuals most severely, and perhaps use of the word recovered can be interpreted as implying that the pandemic is over. That is usually what a recovery implies, yes. This critique misses the mark. No, it does not. It neglects to acknowledge some very, and this is just so fucking par for the course. CPUSA, get over yourselves. You suck, and it's time you start making changes, for fuck's sake. Honestly, just stop. It neglects to acknowledge some very critical information about the U.S. healthcare system as it relates to public health and ignores the overall political message that the document is trying to convey. Just fucking stop. Can you just take criticism for once? Seriously. The public health infrastructure in the United States has been abysmal for many decades. Okay, that is not going against anything that was said in the criticism. Unlike other, quote, developed nations, we do not have universal healthcare coverage, such as Bernie Sanders' proposed Medicare for All plan, which again Biden opposes actively, nor do we have something resembling the National Healthcare Service, which is the UK's public healthcare service system, also under heavy attack right now, and there's various public forums, people speaking out about that. It's one of the top concerns of people in the UK right now. The United States has a myriad of federal agencies dedicated to public health, such as the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, as well as publicly funded programs aimed at providing low-cost care to low-income individuals and families, such as Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, etc. None of this is germane to the criticism, but okay. Unsurprisingly, since the onset of the pandemic, adult Medicaid and CHIP enrollment increased by a little over 40%. Well, yeah, I mean, also there were programs that were expanded, but temporarily. However, private insurance still reigns supreme when it comes to healthcare insurance coverage, leaving many Americans either uninsured, underinsured, or priced out of care despite being insured. And while funding for the CDC has hardly been adequate, increases have happened every year since Biden took office. Yes, they used that money to spread incorrect information about the pandemic and minimize the risk. So this is going to wind up being a Democratic Party PR response. Is that what this is going to be? Because that's what CPUSA is known for now, is just basically being like a caucus of the Democratic Party. Anyway, these two facts, as well as others, what does this even have to do with anything that was in the SCORE letter? That's like, I can't even connect the two at this point. Have happened, further validate the demand for access to affordable or free healthcare, which undoubtedly includes the epidemiologic character of the CDC as well. So while it is the case that the COVID-19 pandemic is still ongoing, well, rather than being recovered, and indeed requires more attention than what it has gotten, certain sections of the capitalist class have conceded some ground. No, they have not. When it comes to public health funding, generally speaking, there is no set consensus on this issue within the capitalist camp. What even is your point here? First of all, it's minimal, and the Biden CDC is still denying COVID in its way, just a bit more sophisticated than the Republicans. So basically, they're arguing that, like, the Democrats, while not great, are good enough, and blah blah blah. CPUSA, be better or stop existing. Those are your options. But for fuck's sake, it's so. Why is anyone in this party? That's what I don't understand. Why would you ever join this party and stay in it? I don't get it. Anyway, the fascists within the GOP are itching for the opportunity to cut funding for and dismantle the very little public health infrastructure that does exist, which is evident by their history of cutting public social programs in general. So in that regard, it is true that it is a pillar of their policy. So again, fascism is only in the Republican Party, according to CPUSA. This is consistent with their hashtag vote against fascism campaigns that they trot out every fucking election. Their co-chair, Joe Sims, is a complete embarrassment in this regard. It goes completely against Marxism-Leninism. What is your party even doing? And I'm sorry, but this whole thing of like the locals are good, but the national sucks, that's not good enough, okay? Get control of your party or do something else, because your party is joined at the hip with the Democrats. So anyway, so in that regard, it's true that it is a pillar of the GOP's policy. While the CPUSA document in question does not specifically name COVID and public health, yeah, because, why would it talk about one of the main issues of our time as one of the main targets of Trump's GOP? It does state the following. Quote, the Republican Party is arguably the most dangerous political party in history. Its strategic defeat is a historic imperative. It is central to social progress. Indeed, it may well be central to human survival, unquote. So if you think that the fascism is just in the Republican Party, if you think that this isn't a system like good cop, bad cop, where they're both out for basically the same purpose, using different coordinated tactics, you're a fucking chump. You're not the vanguard. You are actually behind the understanding of a lot of people in the population. You're not ahead of it. This is ridiculous. At what point do the members of CPUSA say enough is enough? What is this? What are you talking about, the strategic defeat of the Republican Party? Just every election, year after year, you want to get more Democrats in? That's your solution? Where is that going to get you? The Democrats do most of the same things, but with different tactics and flavoring. And the Democrats, the top Democrats are all like, we need a strong Republican Party. They're part of the same system. They work together to maintain the system. Do you get that? The good cop and the bad cop, like one yells in your face, one gets you a candy bar. They are a team. They work together for the same purpose. In this case, it's to maintain and expand U.S. imperial interests. They're not separate. They don't fight each other. The Democratic Party does not want to see the end of the Republican Party. So this strategic defeat thing, what do you mean strategically defeat? What does that look like? What are you talking about? The Democrats, in order to do that, would have to ally with the left. They've shown time and again they want nothing to do with the left. They will lose rather than work with the left, because the people that fund both parties do not want the left anywhere near power or even with the possibility of getting power. How are you calling yourself the vanguard of the U.S. working class, and this is your understanding? It's appalling. Anyway, very clearly, the CPUSA is expressing that the GOP, and implicitly here just the GOP, threatens human survival through their policies of deconstruction, austerity. No Democrat would ever do austerity, right? Privatization. No Democrat would do any of this. Like, the Democrats aren't a fucking neoliberal party. Wake up. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Why, there's a lot of different communists listening to this. A lot of them in the US. Why are we collectively tolerating the existence of this fucking stain on US communism, the CPUSA? Why are we tolerating its existence? Honestly, it's holding everything back. And limited government in general, which of course envelops their approach to healthcare and public health as well. And guess what? The Democrats are right there, part of maintaining the system. They will throw a few more crumbs in, but there's no fundamental change ever. Not only because of the nature of these policies, but also because, quote, the economic impacts of racism and sexism. This isn't even, what are you, like, this isn't on the topic of what the score letter was about. What are you talking about? The economic impacts of racism and sexism, such as ongoing wage differentials. For African Americans, they've grown worse since the start of the century. Housing discrimination, unequal access to healthcare and education, obviously have deeply affected those sections of the country's diverse working class. Institutionalized racism and misogyny are clearly hard at work. Okay, that's the end of the quote. True, but what does this have to do with the criticism? Can't you just say, like, yeah, my bad, COVID's still, COVID's not over. We'll change that line. Would that have been that difficult? But no, you can't do it. You can't do it. Through over-scrutinously nitpicking language, fuck you. Just fuck you. Fuck you and fuck your fucking useless party. You're Democrats. You're small d Democrats, just like your fucking Twitter account said. You're so fucking clueless, you're oblivious, and I think it's on purpose. The critics at SCORE have failed to understand that the CPUSA's Forward Together for Pre-Convention Discussion document is inclusive of their very valid concerns, which I've kind of just been shitting on, regarding COVID-19. Resolute ideological and organizational battles against political forces that seek to perpetuate institutionalized bigotry within healthcare are a threat to human survival and social progress. The necessary time and attention that the chronic and acute effects of COVID-19 pandemic deserves will not come about because a group of communists in the CPUSA or otherwise declare it to be a top priority. What is your purpose for existing? What is your fucking purpose? Like, you're like, it doesn't matter what we do. Why do you exist? Why are you having a convention if what you say and what your priorities are don't matter? So first, they're nitpicking your language. Then the concerns are actually valid. Now it's like, well, we can't do anything anyway. Wow, it's mind-blowing how much you're contradicting yourself. It's a joke. Like, this is a complete joke. This party is a joke. It's a joke every time it opens its mouth on any criticism, on any serious issue. It's a joke. Have you ever watched their live streams? They're ridiculous. They're ridiculous. The CPUSA should not exist. Something needs to take its place. Fuck the CPUSA. I'm sorry. This is just ridiculous. Ridiculous. Mobilizing the masses of workers in the struggle for healthcare as a democratic right is the requisite solution. So now we're ping-ponging back to this. As the document states, quote, working class power is the only language the ruling class understands, regardless of the inclination of its various factions. Ruling class power only concedes to the power of consciously mobilized demand. But again, as a communist party, what are your priorities? The idea is that communists advise and give leadership and direction to the masses. We don't just rely on spontaneity and just document the results. So if you're not setting your agenda appropriately with the right priorities, you're not going to be able to give the right. Anyway, this is just a refusal to admit the fault that is behind the criticism here, or that is the subject of the criticism. So anyway, that was it. Unbelievably, that was it. Let me make sure I didn't miss something there. That was a very abrupt end. Yeah, that was it. That was it. Oh my God, fuck CPUSA. Anyway, so this is the response to that from SCORE. It's titled First, to learn, secondly, to learn, and thirdly, to learn. CPUSA's core values and the ongoing pandemic. May 22nd, 2024. The following is a response to Moshe Pinero's response to SCORE's earlier letter to the CPUSA on their approach to COVID-19. All right, we just read both of those. So let's get into this. A CPUSA member recently responded to a letter from SCORE about the CPUSA's political line on the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic in their pre-convention document. This response ignored SCORE's valid critique and instead showed why communists are not organizing around COVID. There is a contradiction between how left parties, particularly the CPUSA, educate their members and members' vulnerability to bourgeois propaganda. This contradiction is clear when communists see through lies about issues like Palestine or mass incarceration, but fail to see through propaganda on COVID or vice versa. People in the imperial core are fed propaganda since birth, leading to linear, reductionist, and individualist thinking. Deepening knowledge and engaging in practice in the following key areas would help in overcoming this internalized propaganda. Conceptualizing the dynamic flow of the structural and superstructural processes that keep capitalism running is key to addressing conjunctural issues like COVID. In other words, it's a juncture of many different topics all coming together. Communists in the imperial core often see through one set of lies or one invented reality about issues like labor exploitation, the war on terror, or the eugenic ableist component of fascism, but they cannot apply, I'd say at least easily, that understanding to another set of lies. And they need help, and that's why the vanguard of the communists and our advanced theory is supposed to be able to help people. So anyway, a group may even know that mass organization is the biggest tool against bourgeois forces, but without understanding how these systemic processes are interconnected, their full capacity to effect change will remain unrealized. Blaming one party, the GOP, and focusing on elections ignores the deeper root causes of crises, especially the ongoing health crisis. Treating politics like a sport and not addressing root causes often leads comrades to miss the interconnection of systemic issues. Both the dominant parties in the USA have an identical policy trajectory in the arena of public health. Yeah, they're both neoliberal parties. Both fight against workplace protections and use health authorities for corporate interests. They implement great air filtration systems privately for themselves, but they hypocritically reject them publicly. This dismantling of public health was understood in prior socialist struggles, as Score mentioned in its previous letter, quoting and referencing Marx on the Factory Acts and Marta Russell on eugenics. Educating comrades about the state's pivotal role in maintaining capitalism is crucial to effective goals, strategies, and tactics. Praising the Democrats, a conservative party which serves the exploiting class, for increasing public health funding ignores myriad ways that those funds were misused. Yeah, I mean, for example, look up Biden, how much of the COVID money under Biden went to increasing police budgets. That sounds like something I made up, but it isn't. Like, COVID money that didn't get used went to police budgets. That's a real thing that happened, and that's really consistent with, you had in 2020 people in the streets saying defund the police, and some saying abolish the police, and then you had Biden in the campaign saying, no, we need to give them more money, more training, shoot them in the leg. Remember that? Is this coming back? I know it's hazy because we've been through a lot of trauma in the last 4 years, but that is what he said. And then the funding actually did flow in that direction, very consistent with that for anyone who would care to actually examine it. Oh yeah, it's the next line. I didn't even read that. So undermining the goals of the Black Lives Matter movement and now the Free Palestine movement by shifting them to police funding via sleight of hand. Yeah, that was exactly what I was just talking about. Downplaying COVID's danger, comparing it to the flu, or talking about the ongoing mass disabling pandemic as if it is over, which is again what the word recovery implies, undermines public health. Similarly, not seeing the state's role in indigenous struggles, climate catastrophe, neocolonial wealth extraction, the size and shape of the reserve army of labor, and many other issues actively undermines efforts to effect real change. This is really good. And, you know, I got to say, I think that within the next few years, there's going to be enough highly educated communists out there who have been through real world discussions. Like Joe Sims is not, he's not getting onto comments. Like if he actually just went out there and tried posting his bullshit, I mean, him and, you know, I'm using him as an example, but like anybody like him, he would get his ass pummeled. Like, you just cannot go out there with that kind of revisionist, reformist garbage and survive. I mean, among communist circles, which is obviously the relevant, set of the relevant demographic. It just doesn't work. And so how is this guy able to stay in power and others like him year after year after year? It's incredible. Anyway, Politicization of trusted bodies has undermined their credibility and effectiveness. In many areas, and especially with COVID, it is difficult to accept that respected scientific authorities, and especially public health authorities, have been used as political tools to maximize exploitation. Accepting this puts a heavy responsibility on our shoulders, to ourselves, our children, and our community. This can be painful, but solidarity is a salve. Through mutual education, principled struggle, reflective practice, and empathy, we can help each other to bear this burden. Yeah. Applying the science of revolutionary change and interconnection, especially analyzing appearance versus essence and form versus content, is a powerful tool. SCORE's previous critique was about internalized propaganda, not a wording mistake. We understand health is not healthcare access. Healthcare access is not the same as COVID risk mitigation, and access to the highest quality healthcare or even free healthcare does not determine whether or not someone gets sick. Misunderstanding the limits of reformism and electoralism reflects a deeper issue in understanding how the communist theory of change is applied. Change is not accidental. It happens when a group prioritizes and actively organizes for it, intentionally and collectively. An organization cannot change what it has not decided to fight for. And this is what I was saying when I was reading the thing, and he's like, well, it doesn't even matter what we say anyway. Okay, well, if your organization is ever going to matter, it has to pick priorities and set an agenda. If you don't even think that matters, why are you going to the convention? Something to do? Like your D&D group is taking that week off? Like, what's the point? Is this just recreation to you, or, you know, a hobby? What is it? Reforming healthcare access will not result in a change in the mitigation of COVID. Yeah, because mainly it is about keeping the thing from getting into your body. That means making social behavioral changes. Holding a deeply incorrect political line without sufficient investigation and without having engaged in principled struggle is easy. What's difficult is to commit not merely to a temporary or superficial change, but to a fundamental change in how a party's shared values turn into material results and concrete actions. The state has completely failed on public health from a proletarian perspective and is not addressing this issue because it goes against the interests of the ruling class. For the reasons outlined in SCORE's previous letter, and to protect the health of our comrades, we must take this issue to heart. Activist group members must recognize that they are part of a community and have a duty to protect it, and that duty includes rigorous investigation and principled internal struggle. SCORE demanded clear action, and not on healthcare or word choice. SCORE was not asking for a temporary convention policy or superficial in-person meeting guidelines, but rather a fundamental change in the CPUSA's political line. Effective organization around this line would materially result in concrete actions like mandating masking, free distribution of disposable respirators, improved ventilation, and subsidized air filtration systems, and agitation toward goals such as masks in healthcare and treatments for long COVID. In the CPUSA and across the broader left movement, we must resolve the contradiction between theory, practice, and the propaganda which separates us from one another, not only in the fight against COVID, but in preparation for all of our future battles together. It just closes with a note. SCORE is an international organization focused on socialist organizing, agitation, and education, and centering the world historic COVID-19 pandemic. All members are also members in other parties and organizations, and their website is socialist-core.org, socialist-core.org. All right, that's what we've got for today. We'll go out with some chat, and we will also, why don't we go ahead and thank the patrons now. You know, I actually updated my patrons thing just today, and I didn't get it for the stream, but this is a recent one from last week. So sorry to the couple of people who signed up. I know Lebac upgraded their membership. I can't remember what other changes were made, but thank you very much to the patrons. Patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall if you'd like to get your name on the screen. I will leave up the credits while we do our chat. I'm sure that people have a lot to say here. And let me go back up to wherever we left off. 100% wearing a mask is an act of revolution. It's inherently a political statement against COVID rollback policies. Yeah, mandate it. COVID Party USA. There you go. This rebuttal isn't saying anything. There's CPUSA in a nutshell. If the word recovered doesn't express the idea that COVID is over, what does it mean? What metrics signify a recovery? The stock market? Yeah. CPUSA giving Jordan Peterson a run for the Gish Gallop Awards. There you go. CPUSA seems significantly co-opted by liberals. Ding ding, you win a teddy bear. Absolutely. They've been this bad since World War II. Now, I don't know if they ever had a brief comeback. I heard somebody say in like the 90s they got better, but I don't know. Democrats and Republicans are speeding toward the cliff together. Republicans just have a heavier foot. Yeah, I mean, the Republicans are the more vocally reactionary party, but I mean, they represent the same basic class interests, and they're both trying to take imperialism to the absolute end that it possibly can go to. They want to extend a dying system indefinitely, and they're willing to just throw whoever overboard. The Democrats are supporting a genocide. Yeah, definitely. Sounds like a first-year university essay. So much fluff, no substance. Sounds like they're just trying to get to 100 words, talking about the response. No wonder this person submitted this letter anonymously. It's awful and says a whole lot of nothing. I have found that to be typical of CPUSA whenever they're responding to criticism. So yeah. I wonder if while they're writing this, do they ever think about what would Lenin say? It's if you claim to hold to Marxism-Leninism, it is worth asking that question. Do you also think that the DSA shouldn't exist? Good question. Talked about it many times. I actually, so I definitely have criticisms of DSA. I don't really care whether they exist or not as much as CPUSA. So here's the issue. As I have expressed a lot of times in the past, if you're going to do liberalism, I would at least prefer that you not pretend that your liberalism is Marxism-Leninism, which is my problem with the CPUSA. DSA does not claim to be Marxist-Leninist. It kind of barely claims to be Marxist in a lot of senses. And so, you know, you get what you pay for, I think, with DSA. It's a lot clearer. The benefits to DSA are a very large membership of, I think, mostly well-meaning people. The downsides are there's a lot of reformism. There's a lot of attachment to the Democratic Party. That's going to vary from location to location. Like some chapters, some states, some cities are more like, quote, moderate or right-wing. They're more hooked in with the Democratic Party. And there are some DSA chapters that have strong factions that want class independence. They want political independence for the proletariat. And so they resist DSA aligning with the Democratic Party. But that varies from place to place. They also do engage in real work. They engage in raising the minimum wage efforts, and they engage in union support, and they engage in like housing issues. Like, again, there are various campaigns across the country where you can see the DSA engaging in real work that actually does fight for better living standards. Unfortunately, I don't think the pandemic is really one that DSA has done much on, but again, the CPUSA is really not much better. So again, DSA is what it is. I think that the DSA is not really going to go the distance. Again, it's reformist. It's not Marxist-Leninist. That's not what it takes to get a revolution, which is ultimately what is required. I think in the short term, it can be a hub where people can get experience and get engaged in some real work. You are going to have to fight, and you're going to have to try to give bloody noses, figuratively speaking, metaphorically speaking, to, in political struggles within the organization. You're going to have to fight with the reformists vigorously. I mean, I've seen people in DSA who are utterly narcissistic in their reformist SOCDEM approach. Everyone else is beneath them. And these people they will fight tooth and nail to retain power and basically ensure that nothing really changes. And, that's a thing you're going to come up against in DSA for sure. But like I said, they don't purport to be Marxist-Leninist. You go to a party called CPUSA, it is the Communist Party of the United States, I expect Marxism Leninism or something close to it, and you really don't get it at all. I don't think that they're inspiring. I don't think that they're educating people well. I think they're actually misleading their membership, and I think they act like an embarrassing fucking cult that basically just supports the Democratic Party. I wipe my ass with that. Fuck you, CPUSA. So that's what I think. And, you know, people can listen to the stuff that we're putting out here, and they can listen to what CPUSA is putting out, and they can, you know, study the history of the 175 years of Marxism, and they can figure out who's closer to figuring things out. Now, I'm not a party. I'm a YouTube channel. But I know that a lot of the people who listen to this are active in various organizations. And I think that there will be a resurgence of anti-revisionist Marxism-Leninism that clears out the kind of fucking totally degraded boomer Marxism-Leninism that is just like, has just watched the labor movement fall apart for the last 40 years and has watched the Democratic Party become like, you know, the Republicans were back in the 80s. And it's just, they're just watching it happen. And there's just nothing there. There's no energy. There's no vigor. There's just nothing. There's nothing worthy of the name communist, in my opinion. So, I don't know. You know, I'm a guy who's just read a lot of Lenin and other stuff. But I mean, you know, and I've been involved in various active campaigns as well over the years. So, I mean, it's not like I just started doing this like yesterday. Yeah, anyway, that's where I'm coming from. But they more ask, what would Kerensky say about this? That's their guiding principle. Yeah, so as somebody says, the DSA don't claim to be Marxist-Leninist, plus they actually do some real-world work. And there's limits to that work, but they're actually doing something. Yeah. CPUSA is a fucking wreck, indeed. Biden sponsored the 1994 crime bill. Yeah, I mean, Biden is a right-wing Democrat, even by Democratic Party standards. You know, like Bill Clinton, they're also like in the right wing of the party. I hadn't heard of SCORE before. This article is fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. The CPUSA and all the communist, quote, parties in the U.S. are revisionists. I think that is basically true. There are some smaller groups. I mean, all of the better-known ones are, yeah. Or Trotskyist or something, you know. But there are some smaller groups, I think, emerging that have some promise. And I think that that's really more where the future of communism is kind of the anti-revisionist study groups and small parties, small groups that are forming now. I think that's really more where the energy is going to come from. Because these kind of fucking remnants of 20th century, you know, the old revisionist parties, you know, kind of Brezhnevist parties and stuff like that, and the, you know, Dungist parties, and it's like all that stuff is headed for the scrap heap, because that is going to go down ultimately with the rest of imperialism. It's going to go down in the next few crashes of capitalism as it struggles harder and harder. Like what we've seen with the capitalist system, and we talked about this a lot in the last stream, is they really have struggled to reorganize global capitalism post-2008. You see the Federal Reserve in the United States, the main, you know, central bank, adopting brand new tactics of taking on huge amounts of reserves, and cutting interest rates to like zero, less than 1%, basically giving out money. And this goes back to kind of a humorous epithet given to an old Federal Reserve chairman, Ben Bernanke. They called him Helicopter Ben because they're like, if we have to, we'll just drop the money from helicopters to keep the economy stimulated. This is what they're doing now to try to keep the system in place. And I think that bought them 15 years or so since 2008. After the next crisis, probably in the next few years, they may not be able to use those same things. And so as they restructure, there's going to be a lot of chaos, probably a period of paralysis and breakdown. But as they try to reorganize the system, they're going to have to be more stringent within capitalism. There's going to be more consolidation. There might end up with fewer banks. I mean, well, there definitely will be fewer banks. We're just talking about there's 63 problem banks that probably would not survive an economic shock. in the last stream. And so all the small and medium banks are going to go bye-bye in the next crash. They're going to evaporate. And so already, if you look at a chart, you can just look up like flowchart, timeline, bank consolidation, United States. And over the last few decades, there used to be like 30 major banks, and now there's 4. So like that's where we're at after 2008. That's going to keep going, and it's going to keep going and going. And they're going to be on a thinner and thinner tightrope. And ultimately, the system doesn't end on its own, but it does get more and more chaotic. It becomes more and more kind of paranoid in its self-preservation, more and more fascist, in other words, more and more brutal. And so that's what's coming in the future. But yeah, I think all of that kind of, Russia's going that way already. I mean, they restored capitalism openly 30 years ago. They were already starting to restore capitalism even in the later years of the USSR. China started to restore capitalism around 1980. And now, like in a really big way, they're allowing massive amounts of capitalism, even though they're still like nominally calling themselves communist. And but fundamentally, when you allow that much capitalism, you end up getting governed by the rules of capitalism on a global. The global capitalism is very, very integrated at the world level. So the next time that there's a major global recession, like a major crash of capitalism, China's going to get severely affected by that too. So all that stuff is going to go down with the ship, more or less. And it's just, I think it's more part of the past than the future. So, yeah. And of course, I didn't come out of the gate with this. You pick up communism, you get all these people, the like sort of, typical revisionist Marxist-Leninist stuff, all these remnants still hanging around. And just, it's very uncritical. And, for the first like year or two, I was like, yeah, I guess. And, then you read more Lenin, you see how it doesn't really line up with a lot of stuff that you're looking at. And then you read more about anti-revisionist struggles, and it's like, oh, it's actually like a problem that's been going on for a long time. I mean, Lenin was, anti-revisionism is in a sense included in the moniker Marxism-Leninism, because Lenin took many stands against revisionism in many specific instances. But since Lenin, there have been a lot of people doing revisionism in the name of Marxism-Leninism, and you really have to be aware of that. It's like very easy to underestimate that actually as a beginner, and that's some of the best advice I can give to people, and why I'm making the channel focus a lot more now on anti-revisionist education, because beginners need to know how much revisionism there has been and still is, and just outright fascism now in the name of Marxism-Leninism. Anyway, let's move on with the chat, I guess. So the original article was by SCORE, yes, which was a response to CPUSA COVID policy as expressed in their pre-convention discussion document. Yes. Then an anonymous member of CPUSA responded to that. Correct. Now this article is by SCORE responding to that. You got it. We have in the chat, hello, which I read as help. I recently joined the CPUSA. What should I do? Only you can truly figure that out, but I think start studying anti-revisionist Marxism-Leninism and then assess your party. Be careful about how vocal you are at this point, because there's a lot of fucking chuds in that party who don't want to hear it and probably will target you. Does the chat have any other recommendations for this person? Please post them. Yeah, somebody says abandon it. Abandon CPUSA, study and spread Marxism-Leninism, and investigate the ideological reconstitution of communism. So yeah, the thesis of the reconstitution of the Communist Party. So there's various anti-revisionist trends now. I would say that, so the first major development of revisionism in the 20th century among an established communist or, communist-led country, socialist country, was Khrushchevite modern revisionism. So the Trotskyists will tell you that Stalin deviated, and the orthodox Marxists will tell you that Lenin deviated. But as far as Marxist-Leninists go, Khrushchev, modern revisionism, that continued into the Brezhnev years. However, Brezhnev, they claimed to fix all the revisionism and go back to Stalin-like policies. However, there's a lot of criticism that they didn't actually do that. And then as they got into the 80s, really just started liberalizing heavily, and then the entire thing just fell apart as capitalism came back in full rather than just covertly. So modern revisionism, Khrushchevite revisionism, that was kind of the first big thing. And so among the significant parties which criticized Khrushchevite revisionism were the Communist Party of China under Mao, this is starting in the late 50s, early 60s. Okay. Also, the Party of Labor of Albania, headed by Enver Hoxha. So Albania and China were kind of like leading the criticism of Soviet revisionism in the 60s and 70s. And then after Mao, well, even kind of like in the late Mao years, and this is where anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists, more in the Albanian tradition, or who see the Albanians as kind of like the people who sort of best kept up the criticism and theory and practice for the longest, differ that like even Mao himself in the 70s was starting to do some fucked up stuff, whereas Marxist-Leninist Maoists don't tend to hold that so much. Some of them can bring themselves to criticize Mao. Other Marxist-Leninist Maoists tend to fall into this like personality cult of Mao and start arguing really dishonestly whenever criticisms of Mao come up. This is another reason why I lean more to the Albanian side. So anyway, in the late 70s, after Mao, and then Deng Xiaoping, who at one point was like kicked out of the party for right deviations, became like the head of everything, starts restoring capitalism, the opening up, the market reforms. And Albania said, what the fuck are you doing? And so that led Hoxha to do a reevaluation of like, was China actually building socialism this whole time? And people disagree on the extent of that. I think that we'll do a lot more on that channel, but this was the Sino-Albanian split, Sino referring to China. So yeah, in the late 70s, you had this Sino-Albanian split where Hoxha, trying to continue Marxism-Leninism, started to try to analyze, what happened there in China. So Marxist-Leninist Maoists agree that modern China, from Deng Xiaoping and on, from the late 70s and on, is revisionist. So, this is only the last like half century, so it's fairly recent. So like Marxist-Leninist Maoists and other anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists will tend to agree on a lot of the main questions. But there's also some disagreements about where to go from there. And like there's some theoretical differences between just anti-revisionist Marxism-Leninism and Marxism-Leninism Maoism, which Maoists claim is a third and higher stage and has some new features that aren't necessarily accepted by Marxist, anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists. So, there's different people in the anti-revisionist movements of the last 40 or so years. Like I said, we will eventually do more of like a playlist and series on the Sino-Albanian split and the various theoretical arguments that erupted between Maoists and more like air quotes Hoxhaists, not really Hoxhaists, but just anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists who feel like Hoxha was one of the last, communists in power actually doing it right, so to speak. And there were a number of, actually there's still to this day, international groups that meet that consider Hoxha to be kind of like the last major upholder in power of communism, quote unquote, done right. There's still groups, multiple groups that actually have parties in, on various continents that still meet and analyze things kind of from that perspective. And they're not Marxist-Leninist Maoist in the modern kind of post-Mao sense. But like I said, we'll get more into that with the Sino-Albanian split. A lot of the differences revolve around three worlds theory and some other related questions. But yeah, the sooner the revolution and people knowing shit, the sooner we can all sleep happily. Absolutely. I mean, and again, I think you saw like things like Occupy spring up after 2008. I think that people have done a lot of leftist organizing, reading, and discussing since 2011 and Occupy. So I think the next time that that happens, it'll definitely be stronger. Look, you're still going to have to fight the reformists no matter what. They're always going to be worming their way in. We live in the United States, and it goes for any advanced capitalist country. There's a lot of bourgeois influence that seeps down to the workers. People get wrong anti-revolutionary, anti-proletarian ideas, anti-communist ideas, and that influence has to be fought, and that includes struggle, ideological struggle within the organizations. So I mean, you just have to accept that as like part of life as a communist. But yeah, I mean, I think that I think we've come a long way already since 2011, and we're likely to keep going. But you have to gatekeep. I mean, it's vital that you struggle ideologically. You absolutely have to. How much time did Lenin spend railing against the reformists and other kinds of revisionists? I mean, lots of page space was devoted to this. This is just the thing. Until the revolution is completely secure, capitalism is just on the way out, which has never been the case. Capitalism has always been the dominant mode on the planet, even when 20th century socialism was at its peak. But like after socialism is actually taking over the world, and capitalism is really like being exterminated, and like at that point, okay, maybe you can somewhat relax your guard. But I mean, you look at what happened with Khrushchev, for example. But again, capitalism was still really, really influential and dominant. The USSR had just barely survived World War II. I mean, the communist movement was definitely took some shocks. Let's put it that way. In the early 20th century, managed to survive but damaged, and we got to get it going again. Did I see the tweet thread that COVID should be more feared than HIV? I mean, I've seen COVID be called airborne AIDS because it does impair the immune system. Now, it doesn't seem to be to the same extent as HIV. When like HIV leading to AIDS is like a complete collapse of the immune system where people succumb to like really, really mundane, ordinary infections that if you have a functioning immune system at all, your body will fight off. I can tell you from like firsthand experience, I got infections and other health issues that I do not normally get while my long COVID was at its most active. So I'm a relatively healthy person, and I can imagine if I was 20 or 30 years older, what would have happened. So no, I didn't see that thread. If you want to send me a link, I'll check it out. I've totally given up Twitter at this point. It's just too crazy, and like there's not enough benefit. It's so toxic. But I say this. I resisted even making an S4A Twitter. I finally did in August, I think, of 2021. Used it for like 2 years. Elon Musk bought it. I was like, okay, I'm done. Started using Blue Sky instead. And Blue Sky is a lot quieter, but I feel like I can still get good news out of Blue Sky, but without the feeling like I was just in a car accident kind of feeling that Twitter gives me after about 5 minutes. But it's just too crazy. I mean, it's like also just people go on there just seeking conflict. A lot of kind of personality problems among like the chronically, I feel like Twitter's best posters are also some of the most disordered personalities. Let's put it that way. I don't know how you can even experience happiness after spending like a certain amount of time on Twitter. Anyway, but one of the things I do miss is there's a great long COVID community on Twitter. And so no, if there's good links, do send them along on another system, because I'm really not even checking Twitter DMs anymore. Recently I saw a video of Rob Sewell, I don't know who that is, stating after the fact that Lenin had a series of strokes that put him out of action, and quote, at that time you had the growing bureaucracy within the Soviet Union because it was a backward country and 70% of the country was illiterate, so very few people could read and write. So the old officials started to come back in the state apparatus, and Stalin was the figurehead of this bureaucracy itself. This seemed to me like a Trotskyist viewpoint. Let me look it up because I don't want to wait till I get to the bottom of the chat for that. I don't know if I'm going to find, it seems like a fairly common name, but let's see if I can find out who this is. Oh, he's the editor of Socialist Appeal. Yeah, IMT. Yeah, that's Trotskyist. Didn't the USSR have to resort to keeping the state due to outside imperialism and wars? Uh, in part, yeah. I mean, about a third of the world at the peak was socialist in the 20th century. So that's still not even a majority. And yeah, it was under heavy, heavy attack and constant espionage. I mean, the United States in the Cold War was like constantly trying to destroy the Soviet Union. So, yes, in part. But I mean, they also never reached, full communism. This was one of the things about Khrushchev. In the Khrushchev years, they were saying like by 1960 that it was like fully communist, but they were saying all kinds of horribly revisionist stuff, like that it was a dictatorship of the whole people. And I mean, it was just the wheels were like coming off already. Revisionists really got control of key seats of power. What's the biggest reason why no world revolution has happened yet? Is it revisionism? I mean, within the imperialist countries themselves, I think that, Marx's prediction was that the proletariat of the most advanced capitalist countries would do revolution first. What he unfortunately seemed to underestimate was the influence of the bourgeoisie on those populations, bourgeoisifying the proletariat and creating social chauvinism and other corrupted opportunist tendencies that would really stunt the revolutionary movements within the UK and France, etc. So you have the bourgeoisification resulting in opportunism and reformism that crippled the revolutionary movements in the UK and France and the US. Germany got closer to fighting it off. They actually had kind of a revolutionary moment. Italy also had a revolutionary moment, but the socialist leadership after World War One was not seizing the moment, and so they let the revolutionary moment pass by. So I think that that's a really probably the most significant factor. What we saw instead was around the periphery in countries like Russia or the less developed countries of Eastern Europe and China and elsewhere in the really less developed world, what communists were able to do was kind of like at the tail end of feudalism as the bourgeoisie was just setting up. In other words, almost like as the bourgeois revolution was occurring, the communists stepped in and took control of that revolution for the proletariat. And, this led to varying results. They were able to build socialism in some of these countries and achieve a certain level of success. However, it was never able to surpass capitalism in the sense that it started really to drown capitalism kind of on its own terms in the way that maybe was needed. And ultimately, like most of these efforts kind of fell back into capitalism eventually, unfortunately. Maybe because capitalism was still the dominant influence on the planet and these countries were just not strong enough. I kind of think where we are at in the future, in 2024, it's not that revolution is impossible in my view in the most advanced imperialist countries. It's that things haven't gotten bad enough and people haven't gotten sick enough of it yet. Like the imperialists have always been able to buy off the population or fool them into taking up opportunist, class collaborationist political stands. They also use huge amounts of fascism to repress the movement. So you can make like a chart. There's probably half a dozen major influences. You have the fascist police state, you have the opportunism, the bourgeoisification, the social chauvinism, the social imperialism, like buying into the enhanced living standards bought by the super profits of overseas exploitation. There's a bunch of factors that have staved off a revolutionary impulse in the masses of people in the most advanced countries. Things just aren't bad enough, bottom line. So as things do get worse and the system goes into more and more crisis, that becomes more and more possible. Like we're living through a housing crisis right now, which is literally unprecedented. So the more that there are crises which are unprecedented, the more likely something like that becomes. Like we wouldn't have been having this conversation 10 years ago on this level. There wouldn't be this many channels. There wouldn't be this many young people interested in and talking about communism. I never saw anything like this 10 or 20 years ago. Nothing like it. It's growing because conditions are getting worse. We're still in the stages where people are talking about what is communism? What do we do? Are there any parties? 10 years from now, we won't be in the same place. There's also climate collapse. I mean, people are really starting to look around, especially young people, for what do we do about this? And kind of all options are on the table, including, the communism that the boomers were, told is like satanic and whatever else. So we're seeing that conversation evolve, even if we're not maybe anywhere near the point of a revolutionary moment. But 20 years and 3 major economic collapses later, maybe we are. And who knows, there's also kind of the moderately developed countries as well. I mean, you have the whole thing with BRICS now, where, like Seinfeld, what's the deal with BRICS? You ever notice? You've got another capitalist bloc emerging. We may have World War III. There's a lot of people that like to ascribe socialism to that. That's a lot of nonsense. It's a growing inter-imperialist, inter-advanced capitalist war. And so there's a lot of possibilities of massive, massive chaos erupting, out of which people might finally say, you know what, I've had enough of this. I'm laying down my life so that there might be a future for this planet, not even just for the human species, but we're literally, through our industrial activity under capitalism, the profit seeking without any regard for the environment, we're causing ecological collapse. 60% of animals have been killed off at least since 1970, according to some estimates. So, it's dire. It may happen just like Marx said, that the really lasting start of the revolution does begin in the imperial core, so to speak, but we're just not there yet. I think he was really hoping for best case scenario in terms of that the proletariat would organize just as the bourgeoisie was embryonic and just setting up their new capitalist governments. But obviously that didn't happen. And then they really fortified their positions across the 20th century. The USSR scared the shit out of them for a while, but then the USSR fell into revisionism and became capitalist. And now it's, just the Russian Federation and other countries. So we're in a world really without much of a socialist menace, so to speak, that is organized in building socialism and all that kind of stuff. And, it's got to be built from the ground up again, but under 21st century conditions. And I do think we're seeing the foundations of that emerging now. But I also think that what we're experiencing now is going to seem really easy in terms of the social chaos and upheaval compared to what it'll take to make Americans actually fight the fascism that is right here. There's already people doing it, but for it to truly become like a mass movement where there's an educated, steeled core of people doing it, we're a ways off from that. So I hope I answered most of the question. I think what I was trying to say about the moderately developed world is it keeps going in the direction of capitalism right now. So that's not even I don't know how strong the socialist movements are in a lot of those countries. And I think what we saw in a lot of the 20th century is while you had a more revolutionary proletarian China in the mid to late 20th century, when you had the USSR aiding movements, there are a lot more national liberation struggles and things like that might at least nominally have a socialist character, and now that's kind of just gone by the wayside more or less, and does need to emerge reinvigorated. But again, a lot of the movements now are oh yeah, we're go Putin, Putin's progressive, Putin's gonna pave the way to socialism. What are you even talking about? So again, hence the focus on anti-revisionism. PSL is pretty bad too. Pro-China, Dungist, bad COVID record, and something else issues. I'm not sure what that abbreviation is. Yeah, that's what I was saying before. A lot of people are propagandized because capitalism just runs billions of dollars constantly, week by week, to keep the propaganda up. The reason they spend that much money on that is because they're afraid of what they would do if they stopped. So, they do have to keep propagandizing people for sure. Keep trying to spread the bourgeois influence and contaminate any independent proletarian ideology and theory developing. I'm off Twitter for 99% of stuff. I honestly should just uninstall it at this point. I keep it around in case I absolutely need to read something on there, but I never open it unless somebody specifically sends me a link. Twitter is awful in every way, and I wish everyone would leave it. Yeah, I mean, it's just becoming red pill central now anyway. I think that the atomic bomb also put up a large block to the advancement of socialism. Yeah, I also agree with that. The U.S. under Nixon almost nuked Vietnam. So, yeah, definitely. The atomic bomb was a big... it's harder to sort of launch a war when the USA could just nuke you. So that is significant. Enough of us are bribed, and the others betray their own class because they've been indoctrinated to think they'll eventually become the, quote, successful upper class. Yeah, I mean, this is the petty bourgeois mentality imitating the bourgeoisie, even though you're not actually the big bourgeoisie. So are we in reality just supposed to wait for the tendency of rate of profit to fall and educate ourselves in the meantime? I mean, you agitate, educate, and organize to the extent that you can, given all of the opportunities that present themselves to you, and make opportunities where you can. But I think, history is decided by the masses. If the masses have decided, we're going to put up with this for now, I mean, you can agitate against that, and you can try to draw out their complaints and break through the denial. But, and there will be some people who stay in denial right to the very end. But the worse it gets, the more people will say, enough is enough. It's not about waiting. It's just about understanding the possibilities and the limitations of any given situation. As Lenin said, yeah, exactly, there are weeks in which decades happen and decades in which weeks happen. Sometimes just a lot of time passes and you are waiting for something historically significant to break. And then, there's sometimes months where just historically significant events are popping off with abandon. And you can see that there was a buildup to them over that previous relatively stagnant period. But yeah. Yeah, Seinfeld was recently complaining about how there are no real men anymore, as if he was the top specimen. Jerry Seinfeld is one of the most painfully unfunny people ever. I cannot stand Seinfeld. I never could. Never could. Actually, when he decided that he was God's gift and the representative of manly perfection, whatever that was, a month or two ago, there was a bunch of people talking about how Seinfeld was, in fact, a show about a bad comedian being a bad comedian, but who didn't know he was a bad comedian. But that the whole premise of the show was that this was never discussed. Anyway, he's terrible, so it was about a bad comedian, whether it was meant to be or not. I think on some level we are going to have to wait for things to get worse in the developed or decaying imperialist countries, but I think we need to take important action in the meantime. That is part of my own planning here. Yeah, I mean, let me put it this way. If there was more organizing prior to, say, Occupy breaking out, there could have been a much more organized and sustained response to that. But, the currently existing generations of U.S. working people have to learn the lessons that they need to learn and then transmit them to the people coming up so that chain is not broken and the chain remains consistent. That has to happen. And, there wasn't enough struggle in the 90s, in the 80s, and it really did get kind of dropped during the boomer years, especially. End of history and all that. We're working our way out of that now and kind of shaking the dust off of the class struggle. I think that's where we're at. And I think we need to intensify it, and we do that by agitating, educating, and organizing. Keep it up year on year. It will improve. And the next time something pops off, I think you will see a better response from the working class. But, we got to be building the labor movement. That's still in its infancy. I mean, the labor movement is still at a decades-long low. Really, it's at the lowest point since the 1930s. I mean, that's the main proletarian class organization, is a labor union. So we got to build that. We got to fight the reformist tendencies within it. There's a lot of work to do. And, we've been getting our asses kicked for a long time. What would be the best way to handle a conversation? Need a lot more information about that. I am a beginning Marxist. After reading State and Revolution in your audiobook, I believe you mentioned it is an ongoing debate of global revolution or trying to have a revolution in the USA. Yep, that was a few years ago I recorded that. I wanted to see if you have a different answer now. Nobody really knows. I mean, I still think basically that Marx may have been correct, but he had the timeline way off. Because even the socialism that did erupt around the periphery of imperialism got reabsorbed into capitalism, more or less. So it gave us a lot of data about what's possible under certain conditions, but it did not result in the kind of lasting, growing revolution that I think, as we read Fascism and Social Revolution in the 30s, it was assumed that the USSR was just going to keep improving forever and not, cease to exist by the early 1990s. And that, it wouldn't spawn a bunch of revisionist-led countries in Eastern Europe and so on. So, there was a lot of problems that developed in the late 20th century. I think World War II did a lot of damage to the international communist movement. Some of it somewhat self-inflicted. I mean, disbanding the Comintern. There are a lot of problems. I think, on the channel, we're still making efforts to unpack a lot of that stuff. I think that a lot of the pat answers you find are just that, like they're really simplistic. And what I'd really like to do in the next couple of years on the channel with the educational arc is dig more deeply into, like, for example, a Bill Bland's The Restoration of Capitalism in the Soviet Union, which is an anti-revisionist work critiquing how, going back to Khrushchev, there were elements of capitalism being reintroduced into the Soviet economy until it took a quantum leap forward under Gorbachev and the whole thing went kaput. So it's just not as simple. Yes, there was espionage. Yes, there was like stagnation in the Brezhnev years, but why? That we can move beyond these pat answers because, it's one thing to kind of use those as handholds as you're just getting started with theory reading, which I really was doing in a really in-depth way 4 years ago. But, reading more and more for years now and seeing all the kinds of, revisionist, basically fascist crap being bandied about as Marxism-Leninism these days, I want to dig past the pat answers and find out really what the hell happened. So that's still a work in progress for me, but those are some of my thoughts as I go on. I'm an inventor that's very angry all the time, and I'm going through your Browderist videos while I'm at work today and feeling angry. Fair enough. All right, well, that's about it for today, and we've been thanking the patrons for like half an hour, so that's all set. But thanks to everybody who showed up for the stream today. I'm really happy we were able to get some more chat in because I hadn't streamed in a while, and then we streamed last week, and we didn't really do much chat even then, so I'm glad we were able to like just chat for a while. But I'm going to call it there. Thanks to everybody for showing up and helping to make this what it is. And, it wouldn't be the same stream without you. So I appreciate it. And I'm sure all the listeners appreciate it. Thanks also to everybody listening out there on YouTube, Patreon, Spotify, Substack, SoundCloud, wherever else this has been posted. Red salute. And we will see you in the next video.